Ah, there we go. Right. Sorry about that. Full start. Let's try again. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee. Welcome to members of the public. It's really great to see so many people in the public gallery. You're very welcome to be here. Just so you know, we're not expecting a fire drill tonight. So if the alarm does go off, the fire exit is that door there. You can follow signs and congregate outside. Welcome to everyone on the committee. I'm really looking forward to working with all of you. Welcome back to people who've been on the committee before, and welcome to all new members of the committee, people who are newly elected or just new to the committee. And welcome to officers who are sitting up this end of the table. If you could all just introduce yourselves when you speak for the first time, just so everyone, including members of the public, knows who you all are. Thank you. I'd also just like to quickly thank everyone who has been on the committee and left. Thank you for all your work, and thank you to the outgoing chair for all your work that you've done for licensing. Okay. So the agenda, we'll start with apologies. We have apologies from councillors Knight, Mason and Smalley. Everybody else is here, but we don't currently have a vice chair. So I'm hoping we can just elect one just in case we need a vice chair at any point in the meeting. Does anybody have any, would like to nominate anybody for vice chair? I can't see any hands shooting up, so could I nominate Councillor Cuthbertson? Would anybody be happy to second that? Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. Can we just have a quick show of hands that everyone's all right with that? Great, thank you very much, everyone. Councillor Cuthbertson elected as vice chair for this meeting, and then hopefully we'll have a more permanent vice chair soon. Declarations of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interests or other registrable interests to declare in respect of business on this agenda? No? Okay. I'd just like to remind all members that we're required to keep an open mind until we've heard all the information. So if a member feels predetermined, now would be the time to declare that as well. Okay, great. So before we get on with the rest of the meeting, I just wanted to, I've just added to my list a reminder to use the microphones because I need it too, clearly. It's just really important so that we can all hear each other in the room over the sound of the air conditioning, and also so that people watching at home can pick it up on the webcast. And for new members, it's the button in front of you that it says mic under it. It looks a bit like a Wi-Fi symbol. So just a reminder to use that when speaking and to turn it off when you finish speaking as well. All right, thank you. So agenda item 2 is minutes from the previous meeting. We just need to approve them as an accurate record. Does everybody feel like they are an accurate record of the meeting of the 4th of April, 2023? Yes, show of hands if everyone's happy to approve them. Great, thank you very much. I will sign them as an accurate record. Agenda item 3 is public participation. We do have some members of the public registered to speak. Check on the list. The first person on the list who registered to speak is Wendy Loveday, but since she registered, she's no longer able to attend. So she's asked me to read out a statement on her behalf instead, which I have agreed to do. So I'll go ahead and do that. Good evening, councillors, and thank you to the chair for reading this. I apologise for my absence. I did intend to come along to say hi to you all tonight, but unfortunately I can't due to unforeseen circumstances. So via Councillor Melly, I'd love to give a very warm welcome from the taxi trade to all of the committee's old and new councillors. We want to work with councillors, so now seems like a good point to mention coffee and cake. I'm always up for meeting for either or both of these, preferably both, and a good chinwag about issues that we as a taxi trade and you as our councillors may be having, and the help that we can offer each other by working together. It is a two-way street, so we are always willing to listen, learn and compromise or agree. We want what is best for the travelling public, and we can't do that without your help. Our request today is that you look into reopening Penley Grove Street and Lowther Street. Rather than list the many reasons here and take up your meeting time, I'll send another email with clear details from the taxi trade, which will support our request. So for now, our request is simple. It is for an opening for a discussion, a sit-down, a friendly open table where viewpoints can be exchanged, discussed, debated, and understood by all. And if that just happens to involve coffee and cake, then it'll definitely get my vote. Thank you, Wendy Loveday, York Private Hire Association. So that was our first public speaker. We have a second public speaker to come and speak to us today, which is William Swords. Great, excellent. Would you like to come and sit just down at that end of the table? And there should be a microphone that you need to turn on even before you start speaking. And you have up to 3 minutes. So go ahead whenever you're ready, when you're at time. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here today to ask you to reconsider the policy you adopted in July 2022 regarding the issue of Hackney Carriage vehicle licences. The policy was that new Hackney Carriage vehicle licence would only be issued to the following vehicles: black, fully electric, wheelchair accessible vehicles, black, plug-in, electric, petrol, hybrid, wheelchair accessible vehicles. The unmet demand survey of October 21 indicated a need for 7 more Hackneys, and with 3 unissued plates, there was 10 plates to issue. Currently, we have a waiting list of 157 drivers. Some of these drivers have been on the list for 15, maybe even 20 years. Why have nobody taken up this offer of a brand new Hackney plate when they've been on the list for so long? And hopefully I'll be able to explain perhaps some of the reasons why. Reading from the report from June 2022, it says that, quotes, there are now 2 electric plug-in wheelchair accessible vehicles, London taxi type, LEVC, TXC, which indicates they are a viable option. Well, there's now 3, although 2 of them are up for sale. The reality of it is, the first one paid £67,000 for his taxi. He's now trying to trade it in. The best offer he got is £42,000, which is a £25,000 depreciation in 18 months. Add to that the finance payments of £14,500. That vehicle has cost the owner in excess of £500 a week just for the privilege of owning it. Example 2, paid £62,000. Best current offer, £50,000. £12,000 depreciation in 12 months. I would suggest that this is financial suicide, not a viable option. The day-to-day running of these vehicles, it's not all that we think they are. In York, it's not unusual to get longer jobs on a daily basis. As it is, 110 of the 183 Hackneys currently work out of the station. It is not unusual to make journeys in excess of 150 miles. The LEVC has a range on electric of 60 miles, unless it's cold or dark, both of which will reduce the range. Once you have completed your 60 miles, you have 2 options. Stop to recharge the battery. Passengers are not keen on that one. Or switch to the range extender, which is a petrol engine, not so environmentally friendly. Charging the battery at home takes 4.5 hours, costs around £10. If you do it at a fast charge point, it's 45 minutes, around £13. A hybrid car will do around 150 miles for £13. Again, reading from the report, option 1 will ensure that any new Hackney carriage vehicle will be more readily available to passengers with a disability. It also says, to help meet the unmet demand for Hackney carriage vehicles, particularly from users with a disability. My question is, how does issuing 10 more Hackney carriage licences as wheelchair accessible vehicles help a user with a disability get from their home to the hospital and back, or Monk's Cross, or Designer Outlet, or just even to town? We need a totally separate review of the provision of taxis for users with additional needs. The totally unacceptable service that we offer will not be rectified just by issuing more plates. If I've got a bit of time left, I did have another I tried to register for 2, but apparently you can't do that. But just quickly, my other one was regarding licensing vehicles from out of town. We need to find a way to to reduce the number of out-of-town vehicles in York. It's becoming an epidemic. It's not fair. It's not fair to local drivers. There was more to do with that, but I'll save that for another day.
Yeah, thank you. It's 3 minutes per person, but yeah, feel free to get in touch with us by email or outside of this meeting, and that's fine. And thank you very much for taking the time to come and speak to us today.
Thank you.
Okay, so that is all of the public participants in the general remit of the committee. So for all of the remaining agenda items, in order, Councillor Waters?
Sorry to butt in, Chair. It's just, we've had two public speakers with quite direct requests. I just didn't want it to just slip away. Where will these direct requests go? Now, the first one is probably not within our remit, but as luck would have it, we've got the executive member for transport here, so I don't know whether he'd care to comment on that. And obviously the second request, again, a direct request, is within our remit. Would we be bringing that review forward on the back of this request, or will it be sticking to timetable?
I will get back to both of the public speakers about what they've spoken to us about in the committee, but just not in this meeting because it hasn't been on the agenda. It hasn't been published in advance. Yeah, so we'll do that outside of this meeting. Absolutely, of course. So for all of the remaining agenda items, sorry, Councillor Widdowson, go ahead.
Apologies, I thought we had 3 speakers.
Those were the only ones in the general remit of the committee. The other speaker is speaking on a later agenda item, so we'll get to that at that agenda item. Yeah. Yeah, so for all of the remaining agenda items, for members of the committee to be able to vote, you need to be here to hear all of the information and evidence. So we can't leave mid-agenda item, but if anybody does need a comfort break, we will take a break, but it'll be between agenda items. So if anybody, we'll see how long the meeting takes, and if anybody needs a break, we'll take one, and that's absolutely fine. So the next agenda item is agenda item 4, renewal of a sex establishment licence for the adult shop on Gillygate. So can an officer please present that report?
Thank you, Chair. For those members that haven't met me before, my name's Leslie Cook and I'm the Council's Licensing Manager. It's nice to meet you all this evening. Right, this report seeks members' determination of an application for the renewal of a sex establishment licence for a sex shop in respect of premises. They're called the Adult Shop, 70B, Gillygate, York. This is an existing sex establishment licence. It is only for renewal. This shop currently operates Monday to...
Really sorry to pause you mid-flow. We just need to pause the meeting just for a moment while members of the public leave because they can't leave unattended. Sorry, we'll just pause for a minute. Maybe drink some water and stay hydrated. Right, thank you everyone for your patience. We'll resume now with the officers, Leslie's report on the sex establishment renewal.
Right, as I was saying, this is an existing sex establishment, so we're just looking at the renewal of a licence. This shop currently operates Monday to Saturday, 10 AM until 8 PM and Sunday from 12 noon until 5 PM. And a copy of the new renewal application is attached to Annex 1. A copy of the current licence that is up for renewal is attached to Annex 2. This premises has operated as a sex shop since 1997. There have been no complaints received in relation to this premise since the initial licence was granted. The City of York Council has published a sex establishment licensing policy, and that was reviewed in 2017 and is available on the council's website. A copy of the standard conditions relating to sex shops can be found at Annex 3 of the report. The consultation was carried out by the applicant correctly. There are no objections before you today with regards to this application, and a map showing the general location of the premises can be found at Annex 4. The grounds of refusal are listed in the report at paragraphs 13 through to 16, and we do have guidance within Annex 5 regarding relevant locality of a premises. Within the licensing policy, the council has determined a limit on the number of sexual entertainment venues permitted within the authority area. However, this limit does not apply to sex shops. These applications must be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, so the application has to be considered on its own merits. The options before members today are option 1, grant the licence, renewal of licences requested. Option 2, renew the licence with modified additional conditions imposed by yourselves. Or option 3, refuse the application for renewal on one of the mandatory grounds or on one or more of the discretionary grounds. That's a very brief overview of the report, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Leslie mentioned that the sex establishment policy that you're working under was drawn up in approved in 2017. When is it up for review again?
Because the sex establishment policy isn't a statutory policy, we do that policy as best practice. We can review it whenever we feel we want to review it, and it does need reviewing. I must admit, it does need reviewing. It is on my list of things to do.
The reason I ask is it just seems a bit of overkill to bring a renewal like this to a committee and then take up half the agenda and no doubt a lot more time preparing it for an establishment that hasn't had one single complaint in 26 years it's been operating. Surely the policy ought to have the flexibility to delegate to a responsible officer rather than go through all this. I hope you agree.
If members would like to review the statement of sex establishment licensing policy, then that is something that absolutely we can work on together as a committee. Take that on board. Does anybody have any questions in terms of this licence and the options available to us today? No? Okay. So in that case, the options, Leslie has outlined them. They are on page 10. Would anybody like to debate any of them? Would anybody like to propose any of them? Councillor Kilbane. Seconded. Excellent. Okay. Can we just have a show of hands on voting for option 1, which is...
Just for members' benefit, Sandra Brannigan, legal officer, the chair made the correct point at the start of the meeting that only members of the committee who sat through the full item would be able to vote on a particular item. But I was just making the point to the chair that Councillor Mason having just arrived, but you didn't miss anything other than the officer's summary of her report. So you, in fact, haven't really missed anything in that sense. So I'd have thought on this occasion, if Councillor Mason wanted to participate in the vote, it would seem appropriate.
Thank you. That is a helpful clarification. So welcome, Councillor Mason. So what we're voting on is option 1, which is to grant the renewal of the licence as requested with the conditions as requested. So can we just have a show of hands on that, please? For, I think that's unanimous, isn't it? So no need for abstentions or against. Excellent. Okay, thank you, everybody. So agenda item 5 is a decision about changes to Hackney carriage fares. So I'd invite the officer to introduce the report for us, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Just to give you Bit of an introduction. My name's Dave Cowley. I'm the taxi licensing manager at City of York Council. This report asks members to determine a request from the Hackney Carriage Associations with regards to the maximum fares to be paid in respect of the hire of a York Hackney carriage vehicle. So the request relates to the variation to a table of fares. Members are asked to determine the request for the variation of the table of fares via the Hackney Carriage Associations. Section.
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, Section 65 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act allows the council to fix the rates of fares within the area and other charges in connection with the hire of a vehicle by means of a table of fares. The council can only fix the rates of fares in relation to Hackney carriage vehicles. The current fares, commonly known as the fare chart, was fixed by the council in July 2022. This followed a request from the Hackney Carriage Associations for a temporary variation to fares by way of a journey fuel surcharge due to the current economic situation and changes with the cost of living and fuel prices. A review date of the temporary surcharge was set for January 2022, and a table of the current fares can be found at Annex 1. Currently in York, the table of fares covers 5 tariffs, which includes distance and waiting time. It also covers extras, which are additional charges for bank holidays, for animals carried, for luggage carried, and a fouling charge for within the vehicle. The council determines whether to vary the table of fares upon receipt of request of the associations, and there are currently 3 associations representing City of York Hackney Carriage Trade, and it is a request that it's a requirement that the council, that all 3 associations must agree the request, which they have done. At the beginning of the calendar year, the relevant RPI transport indices figures are published by the Office of National Statistics, and the council provides these to the associations with the results of the Hackney carriage fare inflation calculations. The calculations take into account inflation figures, fuel annual percentage inflation figures, vehicle maintenance and annual percentage figures, and vehicle insurance annual percentage inflation figures. Upon receipt of this information, the associations determine if they're going to submit a request to the council to vary the fares. The results in the report indicate over the last 4 years the percentage increases or decreases. As stated above, the current fares were fixed by the council in 2022. The associations did not submit a request for a fare chart review last year. However, the request was made for the temporary surcharge due to the cost of living crisis. The associations did submit a request to vary the fares in February 2021. The request was agreed by the council and implemented in September 2021. And the current proposal of fares can be found at Annex 2. The associations have consulted their members prior to submitting this request. It is a legal requirement under the 76 Act that when a council makes a variation to the table of fares, that is published in at least 1 local newspaper circulated within the district, and the notice must specify a period not for less than 14 days, within which times objections can be made. If no objections to the table of fares or the variations are received, then it shall become operational on the date of the expiry of the notice. In the event that objections are received and they are not withdrawn, the report and any outstanding objections will be referred back to this committee for consideration. The council shall then set a further date, no later than 2 months after the specified date, in which the table of fares shall come into force with or without modifications decided by the council. The options available to members today are to ask officers to publish in the local newspaper the variation to the table of fares by the Hackney Carriage Associations, giving a specified period of 14 days within which objections can be made. And if no objections are made, then the new fares will be implemented on that specific date of advert. Option 2 is to determine an alternative variation to the table of fares and ask officers to publish in the newspaper, again for a period of 14 days. Or option 3 is to reject the request from the Hackney Carriage Associations. There is also an analysis in there in relation to what the fares are currently and what the proposed fares are going to be. There are a number of extras which were considered on the old fare chart, which were that there was an extra charge for children between the age of 3 and 12, and there's an extra charge for each animal carried, which is not assistance or guide dog. They, at the request of the associations, are to be removed. There is an extra charge in there in relation to items of luggage that are transported, and the request from the trade is to increase that to 50p per item with a maximum charge of £1. There is an extra charge there for the third and fourth passenger in the vehicle, which is to be changed from 40p to 50p, but there's no charge for children then under the age of 12. And the fouling charge, this is for passengers who are obviously ill in the vehicle. There is a proposal to change that from £75 to £90 across all tariffs. And standard bank holiday charges remain at £2. There is some fair comparison analysis at Annex 3 within this report. Thank you, members.
Okay, thank you very much. I would just like to comment that Hackney carriages are very important for public protection, for making sure people can get home safely. Disabled people are mentioned in the report as relying on Hackney carriages for having independence and getting about. I would also include women, anybody who is intoxicated or vulnerable at night who needs to get home safely. So it's important that we consider this carefully to make sure that fares are set at a rate that mean people can stay in the industry and this important service is provided, and we don't have a further reduction in people willing to do the job, but that the fares aren't so high that it's prohibitive and people are priced out of using it as an essential part of our transport system. So it's important that we consider it carefully. The options have been outlined to us. They start at the bottom of page 39 and continue on page 40. So to be clear, we're not being asked to approve this variation to table of fares today. We're being asked whether or not to advertise it for consultation. So does anybody have any questions for officers? Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks for the report, David. Can I just be clear on the analysis on page 40, paragraph 19? So the tariffs are going up on a sort of an average of 12% on the face of it, but actually the distance that's charged is changing as well. So there's some kind of, it makes the calculation quite complicated. So for example, on tariff 3 there, it's only going up by 20p. Well, it's charged after 313 yards instead of 1,066, which is, three.
Yeah, what happens is there's an initial drop on the meter, which is the first charge per fixed rate, which would be for the first, bear with me, if we're looking at tariff 3, it would be 313 yards. And then what happens then is the increments go up by 20p. And it's the increments that are going up, which brings down the yardage or the meterage to include that 13%, I believe, in relation to how it's overall fixed. There is the comparisons at Annex 3 in relation to what's initially in at the moment and how the charge would vary per mile and distance. So over 5 miles, technically, at the moment, we charge roughly about £13.60, and that will be going up to £14.20.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Kilbane? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Villiers?
Just wanted to check where these fares are advertised. Is it just when you get into the cab that you can see how you're being charged?
Yes, it's a requirement under the bylaws in relation to Hackney carriage vehicles that they're actually displayed in the vehicle at all times.
Anywhere else as well?
They are on our council website as well in relation to it, so the public have got table of fares to reference.
Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I was just wondering the point around the price increases. So my maths is it's around 13% minimum, 17% average for what I would guess is a typical journey. But in terms of those percentage increases, can you give us some numbers on what a tip, if you've done an analysis on the kind of percentage increase? Because I think we're comparing it to the inflation percentage increase is probably the right way of looking at it from my perspective. So.
Yeah, overall, depending on which tariff it is, it works out at 13%, around about 13%. There are different tariffs relating to whether or not it's a nighttime tariff or whether or not it's a premium rate tariff with number of vehicles or passengers. So in other words, if there was passengers above 5 in the vehicle, then it's slightly higher rate because they're charging at a time and a half for that journey.
And just to clarify, the longer the journey, the greater the percentage increase. Is that correct?
It would be around about 13% across the board as it stands.
Councillor Widdowson?
Can I ask what the process is about the consultation? Because on a first glance, this is quite complicated. And if you took it as a 2-mile journey or a 6-mile journey, you get very, very different numbers. And charging, some of the charges seem to go up an awful lot. So yes, there's 3 to 12-year-old children and animals not charged for anymore, but it's more for each passenger, it's more for the luggage. And I'd just like to understand the consultation process and the understanding of how you're doing the inflationary rate, because fuel has come down by 25% in the last 3 months, and it's forecast to come down another 30% in the next 3 months. So just interested that we don't put these charges up so much that people just don't use the service and we lose it completely.
Yeah, the consultation is the requirement under the legislation is to advertise the increase in fares in the newspapers. We can also look at providing this on our council website that it's gone out for public consultation.
So it's not a consultation, it's an information process.
Yeah, that's the requirement under the 76 Act, is to publish the rate of fares.
So it isn't a consultation, it is an information process. So if we say yes to this being published now, that's the decision.
It will go out with a press release for 14 days for then objections to come into the council if anybody requires.
Okay, so that's different understanding than I thought the word consultation meant.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Mason.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies for being late. The luggage one was the one that got me. I wondered if you knew any context behind, because again, if you look at it per case or whatever else, that's quite a big rise percentage-wise. I think in other reports we've had in the past, it's maybe actually given some example journeys like Front Street to the hospital, and that's been a really easy way to kind of see it in numbers, what it actually looks like, opposed to kind of looking at distances and seconds. It's, blows my mind really. And the only last point was on the procedure. I think maybe when we looked at the policy, we decided, or we'd said about making it easier for taxi drivers to be able to come, or one association to come without every single one having to agree. And I think that was something that maybe has been lost at some point, but we wanted to try and make it easier, because I think this is the problem, is this sets us into a really rigid position that everyone has to agree it from their side, and just doesn't seem very flexible. So I think it should be made easier for the taxi drivers, maybe a bit like an election, they have to have 10 taxi drivers sign a petition for it to be looked at or something like that. But if that could be picked up again, that'd be great. Yeah, we have got a policy review that's due out at the moment, so we can look at that under the policy review. Yeah.
The baggage at the moment, it does take into account that if somebody's coming off a train, if 4 people are coming off a train with 4 suitcases, that at the moment, each one of those suitcases can be charged independently. With this, they would only charge for 2 items within that, which would be a maximum of £1.
While we're on the subject of luggage, mobility aids never count as luggage or would receive an extra fee?
No, no.
Thank you. Councillor Nichols?
Yeah, just going back to the advertising, I was in 76, I don't think we had the internet. So a newspapers, when we say publish in a newspaper, do you mean their internet sites as well as?
Yes.
Cool.
Sorry, yes, it's published technically for 14 days in the paper, and it's usually 30 days or up to 30 days on the internet.
So and just going back to the comparison thing, I mean, it is confusing as hell. And some of the journeys, I think, unless we put a typical York journey, as in here to the race course, people just lost. I mean, the percentages is a quite 20-30% increase. So I think unless we typify, I ain't going to work it out.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Matt Boxall, Head of Public Protection. We can take the point on the report for next time about putting example journeys in. We thought that this would be a helpful way of doing it by doing the graph with all sorts of different journeys, but if that's not helpful, we can go back to the old way or as well for the next time. So thank you for that feedback.
I think as many different ways of trying to understand the information is helpful. Thank you. Councillor Kilbane, did you have your hand up?
On, somebody's still got on. Oh, we're on here. Jason, yours is on. I know. Look at that, gave you the duff one. I just wanted to put Councillor Nichols' mind at rest that if we do approve option 1 tonight, this will be in the newspapers and on the websites and across all of York local media for sure, as well as being advertised, obviously.
Are there any more questions? Okay, in that case, we'll move into debate. Does anybody have anything that they would like to debate or discuss? Councillor Rose?
Someone's got to kick it off. Yes, I think it's definitely worth acknowledging that the inflation level has been high for a couple of years and continue to be really high. I think it absolutely is something that does need to go through as a review like this. But it's worth noting as well that there are people in the city who are vulnerable, particularly in the categories you've already named, for whom looking at if they live on the edge of the city, I think it's about 16.5% increase on a taxi fare each time they get a taxi that they might be paying every time they go to and from work or similar circumstances day to day. So they're already hit by large cost of living increases, particularly the more vulnerable people are impacted more by those cost of living increases. And then on top of that, the transport fees are going to be a lot higher as well. So I guess I haven't really got a point around what we should choose in terms of outcomes from that, but I do think it's probably the most important part to me of the context is the increases in those categories would push people towards less safe options of transport potentially. And that's kind of the balance we've got to strike here, I think.
There's a very careful balance, yes. Does it, anybody else have anything to debate? Any other points to make? Councillor Kent?
This is a question about procedure. So if we say that they should be advertised today, if no objections come in, is it then passed de facto, or do we come back and it's so we're relying entirely on public objections if we? Okay, thank you.
Could that be answered on the microphone, not just by nods? Just yeah.
So yes, it would come into force on the 14th day without objections.
So that yeah, Councillor Widdowson.
Just for next time, is it possible to understand as the prices are going up and they continue to go up for lots of good reasons, what impact that has on journeys? So that we can actually see if a 5% increase or a 60% increase or whatever it is from wherever the charts are, what actually happens. So if it's a journey from here to the racecourse, which is 1.5 miles, do those journeys continue? But to the journeys that are from out of town, where you were saying some of the more vulnerable people, maybe, do those journeys fall away? Just be interesting analysis, because you don't, I can see the numbers in front of me, but I have no understanding of what that impact is in terms of users. And to your points earlier, you know, in terms of safety and vulnerability.
Yeah, we can certainly bring that forward on areas and locations for next time. Thank you.
Councillor Ravilius?
Sorry, I should have asked this earlier, but have we got any indication of how this compares to other cities?
The trade have put this forward on comparison to the North Yorkshire tariffs and also those of West Yorkshire, and so they are pretty compared across that board.
Thank you. Councillor Nichols?
On option 2, it says determined of alternative variation, but what is that, up or down? I mean, could they just, officers come back and say, do you know what, it's £1 for everybody, well, hey, cheap travel? It doesn't make it clear what the variation would be.
Whatever any members here propose and we agree on. Yeah, if there is any of the proposal that you feel isn't quite right, if there's any aspect of it at all that you'd like to propose or discuss amending, then
and
go ahead.
If the officers come back with an alternative which is published and then there's an objection in 14 days, could we go every 14 days, somebody objecting, and there's never an increase? Because if I read that right, every 14 days, it has to be no objections. So if one person objects, the public, if they're smart, could never increase the taxi fares. Or am I just being a bit simple?
If we get objections that are not withdrawn, then the matter would come back to council to review those objections and set a further date, which is normally within 2 months of.
So then if I objected again, it would have to come back and would have to...
No, it would be done on that
just
first
once.
objection.
All right.
Yeah, within that 14-day time scale.
So would anybody, Councillor Kilbane?
Sorry, it does seem an odd way to do things, doesn't it, really? You know, figures are plucked out of the air and not really thinking, not a lot of things, make no think, if you go to buy the banking companies and then that's on work for the negotiation, you know, at the moment we're looking at a 13% increase where inflation's running at 8%, then that additional increase may, somebody's definitely trying to shut me up. And frankly, who can blame them? So you know, if they're asking for an increase that's 5% above inflation, it might have been different at the time they formulated this. So inflation could have been a lot higher, but then again, you know, petrol prices are coming down, diesel prices are coming down. It all just seems a bit, you know, where's the plan to it? If they're saying we need this increase because we need to attract more people into the trade, because we've already heard, you know, you've got 10 licenses that aren't being taken up, then, you know, that's a different issue, isn't it? But it's almost like, right, here's what we want, yes or no. You know, it's kind of...
Yeah, I think the initial fare for the tariffs was set back in 2021. Last year, there was a temporary increase, which is still on at the moment as a fuel levy. But normally what happens is that the annual percentage rates are provided to the trade and they work out the tariff increase that they want to apply for. So when you look back, December 21 to 22, we'd got a 10.97% increase. And obviously from 20 to 21, there was a 9.62% increase. So they've actually, apart from the fuel levy that was put in last year as a temporary measure, there's not been an increase in fares for last year. And so we're catching up as it is on this one, if you look at it with the figures that have been provided to them.
Councillor Kilbane.
I totally take on board now. It's not meant as a criticism of the report or whatever. I just think the process that we follow is far from ideal, isn't it?
Councillor Mason. Oh, sorry, Matt, do you want to respond to that directly?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's not simply plucked from thin air. It is based on these figures from the Office of National Statistics. So there is a formula around it, which is how we get to the position, or how the trade gets to the position to make their proposal.
Councillor Mason.
I suppose off the back of what Pete's saying, that's basically what I was getting to, I suppose, with people being able to come back and change it. It needs all three associations at the minute. And actually, if a small group of taxi drivers, we put this up and suddenly find that it's not working, it's much harder for them to come back as a smaller group and get the buy-in to be able to say, actually, we think this is actually too high now, we want to bring it back down. They'd have to get everyone in agreement, and some people wouldn't be for certain reasons and some people would. So I think that's why I think it's important to make it easier for them to be able to offer a revised table.
Is the table of fares the maximum allowed fares rather than a set amount?
Yeah, it's the maximum allowed fares, yes.
Councillor Nichols, did you have your hand up? No. I can't see any other hands either. So would anybody like to propose any of the options? Councillor Waters?
Just to get it moving, I'll quite happily propose option 1. It might seem an archaic sort of process, but at the end of the day, you end up with tariffs set in stone, there for everybody to see, unlike other methods of taxi movement, whereby prices can change just like that. These people, when this is, I won't say passed, approved for advertising, those tariffs are set in stone, and those people respect those tariffs.
Thank you. Would anybody like to second option 1? Councillor Cuthbertson? Yeah. Okay, would anybody like to debate that at all? Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I'm slightly uncomfortable with it. I agree with what you're saying about it certainly being an important thing to protect. It is important for all sorts of reasons, including the clarity of tariffs. But I still find myself looking at the 10.97% ONS number and the 13 to 16% number we've got on the page in front of us, and trying to square that circle. I feel slightly uncomfortable. It's also, yeah, looking at the lines on the comparison and just trying to work out what that means for residents. It does vary depending on where you are in the city, and I'd be interested to know exactly what that falls out at on poorer and wealthier areas of the city, because I don't think it necessarily falls evenly. So I think my own personal instinct is moving towards option B, but that means that we have to propose something specific for it. And I've got some ideas, but I think I'll leave that for other people to discuss. But I guess I kind of saying that as an opposition to option 1, I guess.
So do you have any specific changes to the table of fares, or changes to the proposed table of fares that you'd like to propose or discuss or suggest?
Leave that with me while other people debate, if that's okay.
Sorry, say that again?
Other people can debate and I'll have a think, if that's all right.
Okay, I haven't seen any other hands. So that might mean we're at the point of voting on option 1, because if nobody's proposing option 2. No, okay, so we'll take a vote on option 1. Again, it will be show of hands. So those in favour of option 1, which is to ask officers to publish in a local newspaper the variation to the table of fares proposed by the Hackney Carriage associations, etc. Those in favour? Yeah, are you counting? Okay. Any abstentions? And any against? Okay, so that has passed option 1. Thank you, everybody. Yes, Councillor Widdowson.
Can I just ask one question, because we've mainly got caught up in the process here. Would it be therefore sensible that over the next 2 to 3 months that the process is reviewed? Because I think actually stopping it tonight is agreeing it tonight is the right decision, so that everybody can move on. But I do think there's an awful lot to be said that the process needs to be looked at, and maybe a bit more what I would consider consultation beforehand, so that it can be shaped in the right way and everybody's got the right type of information. Is that possible, officers, to do that?
Should we pick that up outside the meeting and see who else on the committee is interested in working on that? Is that all right?
Is it not a fixed process? I thought we had to follow the law.
The process in publishing the fares is statutory under the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act. So the 14-day period in which we have to publish the fares in a local newspaper is all set by statutory guidance. However, we can do consultation prior if we needed to do that, and that can be picked up outside.
Yeah, that's the statutory minimum of what's needed to do, not what we're limited to.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So that's the end of that agenda item. There is only one substantial agenda item left, but I don't know how long it's going to take. So this is our last opportunity for a break, really, before the end of the meeting. So I'm going to suggest we take one, grab the opportunity for 10 minutes for a quick comfort break and meet back here, yeah, at 25 to 7. Thanks, everyone. Right. Okay, welcome back, everybody. The next agenda item is agenda item 6, the determination of an application for a private hire operator's licence by Mohammed Iqbal trading as York Cars. So a solicitor on behalf of the applicant should be here online. Will you just confirm, Mr. Schiller, can you confirm that you can hear us and we can just
Yes, good evening. Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you. That's great. Thank you very much. So everyone should have a bit of a procedure in front of them, just so we have some structure to this agenda item. We can ensure a fair hearing. The officers are going to present their report, and then members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the officers. And then the applicant will present their case. I think about 20 minutes should be appropriate and reasonable. And then committee members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. And then after that, the applicant will be able to sum up, address any points that have been raised, and then we'll have a debate and deliberation and make a decision this evening. Okay, so if everyone understands that procedure, we'll just crack on with it, and I'll invite the officers to present the report, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This report seeks members' determination on an application for a private hire operator's licence. The applicant details, like you say, is a Mr. Iqbal trading as York Cars Private Hire. A copy of the application is attached to Annex 1 of this report and is summarised as follows. It's an application for the grant of a private hire operator's licence for Unit 1, Heritage Park, Outgang Lane, which is North Yorkshire, YO19. Annex 2 of the report provides a map showing the location of the premises. The council must determine an application for an operator's licence on its own merits and in accordance with the legislative framework and the policies, the taxi licensing policy of the council, although the policy does not have to be followed where there's good reason to depart from it. In making a decision, the council must consider the application form and any supporting documents and other relevant information. Mr. Iqbal is currently a private hire operator in York, which is licensed for a location at Blossom Street, YO24. However, the policy does not allow for the transfer of a private hire operator's licence from one location to another, and therefore an application for the grant of an additional operator's licence is required. Members are asked to determine Mr. Iqbal's application for the new operator's licence. Annex 3 of the report provides legislation extracts from the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 1976. Private hire operators are defined as in Section 55 of the Act as a person who, in the course of business, makes provisions for the invitation or acceptance of a booking for a private hire vehicle. Having adopted the Act in March 1996, Section 55 allows for the grant of the private hire operator's licence. However, a council shall not grant a licence unless they are satisfied that the applicant is a fit and proper person to hold an operator's licence and that an applicant is an individual that is not disqualified by reasons of immigration status from operating private hire vehicles. I can tell you that Mr. Iqbal is not disqualified by reasons of immigration and therefore is considered further in this report. There is no specific test in legislation to establish whether an operator is fit and proper. However, the Institute of Licensing and the Department for Transport statutory standards provide some guidance on applying the test. Extracts of both are included in Annex 4 and Annex 5 of this report. The 76 Act also allows the councils to attach such conditions on a private hire operator's licence as they consider reasonably necessary to operate private hire vehicles. City of York's current taxi licensing policy was adopted by the executive in September of 2019 and was implemented in October 2019. The policy sets out standard conditions on the grant of a private hire operator's licence. A copy of those conditions is attached to Annex 6 of this report. On the 13th of May 2022, the council and Mr. Iqbal agreed additional conditions on his existing licence. These conditions can be found at Annex 7 of this report. The additional conditions were in place as a response to 34 Cars Limited, which is Mr. Iqbal's Wolverhampton private hire operation, and the use of the provisions to afford them under the Deregulation Act of 2015. These provisions allow for a person licensed as a private hire operator under Section 55 in one district who accepts a booking for a private hire vehicle to arrange another person to provide that vehicle and carry out that booking. If the other person in the other district is licensed under Section 55 within that district and provides a driver and vehicle from that same district. Providing these provisions are met, for the avoidance of doubt, such practice is classed as lawful, and an operator should not be considered unfit purely on this basis. Officers are satisfied that 34 Cars Limited subcontracting arrangements are legally compliant. For the avoidance of doubt, Mr. Iqbal is currently considered by the council to be fit and proper to operate private hire vehicles from the Blossom Street address. Please note that a similar application made to this committee on the 21st of December 2022, members applied the conditions which can be found at Annex 8A, and these form the basis of the recommendations of the conditions attached to Annex 8A. The first purpose of the local authority when licensing Hackney Carriage private hire vehicles, drivers and operators is to protect the interests of the travelling public, and the council is aware that public should have reasonable access to safe and comfortable Hackney Carriage and private hire vehicles because of the role they play in the local transport system. Therefore, the recommended conditions conditions at Annex 8A are suggested to ensure consistency is provided to the travelling public and further the objectives of the licensing policy to provide the travelling public access to safe, efficient and effective public transport service. Finally, by way of background, Section 55 of the Act states that the licence shall remain in force for a period of 5 years, or lesser, should the council think is appropriate in the circumstances of the case. Members of this committee determined in February 2021 to issue licences for a maximum period of 12 months until such time that the taxi licensing policy is reviewed. I can tell you that this policy is currently being reviewed. Mr. Iqbal made a submission for this current application for an additional licence at Outgang Lane on the 26th of January 2023. And Section 57 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act allows that the council can ask for further information as they reasonably consider necessary to enable them to determine whether a licence should be granted. Further information in relation to Mr. Iqbal's application was requested by officers on the 29th of March, and the response being received on the 12th of April, which is attached to this report at Annex 9. The premises at Outgang Lane is currently in operation as a Gladstone Garage, Tyres and Auto Care, and the applicant has stated they are neither a director nor a shareholder of Gladstone Tyres and Auto Care Limited. The hours of operation are to be 24 hours a day, every day of the week. The premises has planning permission for the use of a private hire operating company, and a copy of that planning permission is attached to Annex 10. Condition 3 of the planning permission states that a private hire office shall be conducted as a control room only, and no facilities are to be provided on site for drivers waiting for fares between shifts, nor shall the premises and car park be used as a pick-up or drop-off area for customers whilst waiting. Mr. Iqbal currently holds a private hire operator's licence issued by City of Wolverhampton Council and Ashfield District Council. Mr. Iqbal has pending private hire operators applications with Leeds City Council and Bradford Council. Mr. Iqbal also holds private hire Mr. Iqbal also holds a private hire driver's licence with the Wolverhampton Council and 18 private hire vehicle licences. Mr Iqbal also holds a private hire driver's licence and 16 private hire vehicle licences with City of York Council. The applicant has undertaken the relevant checks and DBS checks, and officers are satisfied that there's no issues and concerns. Attached to this report on Annex 11 gives details of complaints received by the Council's Public Protection Team, which are linked via name over the last 2 years to York Cars. It is observed that most of the complaints relate to parking of York Cars vehicles on or around the garage location at Outgan Lane, presumably whilst being repaired, serviced, etc. at the garage. And it's fair to say that officers consider that parking is problematic at this location with vehicles, including York Cars vehicles, which have been seen on the parts on the pavement and on the verges. If members share the concerns about parking, it may be that they consider an extra condition is appropriate to address the parking issues. It should be noted that Mr Iqbal is not a director or shareholder of Gladstone Garage and may therefore be unable to control parking by their customers. Such a condition has been added as a recommendation on Annex 8B. Officers are also satisfied that there's no material breach to conditions in respect of the current operator's licence. Checks show that there has been 3 instances of drivers used in contravention of the existing condition A. However, Mr Iqbal was unaware of the breaches, and officers are satisfied that he has taken reasonable endeavours to prevent those breaches occurring. Officers can confirm that 1 of the drivers no longer works for York Cars, and the other 2 have subsequently passed the York Knowledge and Safeguarding Test, and therefore would be permitted to drive under the new proposed conditions. Members also need to have in mind that the licence of all operators are currently issued for 1 year rather than 5. There's no requirement within the 76 Act for consultation to take place in relation to this application, and the options available to members today by virtue of section 55 and 57 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act are option 1, to grant a private hire operator's licence as requested with the standard conditions at Annex 6 and or the agreed additional conditions attached to Annex 7 for a period of 1 year. Grant the private hire operator's licence, so this is option 2, with the standard conditions at Annex 6 and any combination of additional conditions or modified conditions that the committee would impose for a period of 1 year, and these conditions are at Annex 7, 8A or 8B, or any other conditions which members consider necessary. Or option 3 is to refuse the application and provide grounds for this refusal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I invite questions for officers, please. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chair. Dave, the company that you referenced, the Gladstone Tyres Auto Care Limited, I wonder why specifically that was the company that was asked about, because that was set up after all of these complaints existed. So I just wondered if there was any, if you'd asked about who was running the business when all the complaints were live.
No, Councillor Mason, we've only asked at the moment that I know regarding this application.
Do we know, I don't know if it's one from Matt's team, but do we know who was responsible for the business when all those complaints were happening?
Sorry, Councillor, I don't, but obviously we have the applicant here later, you may be able to assist. Thanks. Or the applicant's representative, sorry.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. I was myself intrigued as to why officers asked the further questions. Further information in relation to that application was requested by officers on the 29th of March 2023. What was your reasoning for asking those questions?
Under section 57, it was to determine whether or not there was any other additional conditions that may be looked at regarding whether or not the applicant had any reference to that garage facility. Because we knew that there had been a number of parking issues up there, and therefore we wanted to establish the full requirements of whether they were a director of that company.
Were you aware then that the company was actually registered at Company's House on the 21st of February 2023 in the name of a Rabina Iqbal for a nominal £100?
We were aware by the questions that we asked that Mr. Mohammed Iqbal was not a director of that company, but we weren't aware in relation to who was.
A representative of the applicant will have the opportunity to ask questions soon.
Yeah, I just wanted to establish what the officers actually knew before this agenda was written. You're obviously aware of the relationship between the applicant and Bilal Iqbal, who was refused his licence on the 21st of December. Are you aware that Dash Private Hire has got its registered office at Unit 2 Heritage Park from the 2nd of December 22? You'll obviously be aware of the relationship between Bilal and 34 Cars, as was, up to 2014 when he was a director of that enterprise. And I don't know whether you're aware of his other little business enterprise that's registered from Unit 2 of Heritage House, and that is renting and leasing of cars and light motor vehicles, which is an active company and made its last filing on the 15th of May, this year. The whole lot is one big circle.
Other questions for officers? Councillor O'Billy?
If this was to go through, would Mr. Iqbal be granted to operate from both premises, the Blossom Street and this one?
Yes, it can be.
Councillor Wells.
Can I just ask about the complaints? The same reference number is given to 3 issues about parking on the verge. Is it the same car or was it 3 different cars?
It was the same complainant.
But was it different cars or was it the same car?
Yeah, it was different cars.
Just in relation to the suggested condition in Annex 8B, page 87, how would it be enforced?
The condition in relation to parking at the moment is on the planning consent, and we would work closely as officers from the licensing with planning in relation to any conditions that were imposed.
Thank you for that, Dave. Again, I have great sympathy with yourselves trying to square that little circle, because as I said on the 21st of December, I've said at planning, the reason we're here is a failing of the council's planning system. There's supposed to be 5 parking spaces for taxis. That was as a result.
Keep it to questions for now, and we'll have debate later once we've heard information from the applicant as well.
Well, it is a question related to how this will ever be enforced. Physically, there isn't space to park the taxis there when the garage is in full operation. I've noted this last week to a fortnight, there's been special attempts to get the taxis off the road and parked in the garage site. That's not a normal thing. It's physically impossible with its normal working practice. And I've one last question, if I may, Chair.
Go ahead.
The reports at the beginning of the year for the taxi booking office being in operation, lit up on a night, photos of taxis. What came about for your investigations to that? It was through a third party. I didn't see it myself, so that's why I'm intrigued.
Yeah, officers have attended the location on numerous occasions, and the garage facilities have been locked up with a security officer at place. And we are aware that Mr. Iqbal has been trading from Blossom Street in the offices there.
Councillor Villiers.
In the application, it says 91 plus vehicles. Do we know how many vehicles that is?
Not fully. We haven't run the analysis in relation to how many York vehicles there are at the moment. We're roughly around about 50 vehicles, but I'm sure the applicant can clarify how many there are in operation. Our licenses in relation to operators' licenses go up in tiers in relation to how many vehicles, and 91 is the maximum that we allow. So it's 91 plus.
Are there any more questions for officers now? There will be another opportunity later if you think of something or another issue comes up later. We obviously will make sure we have all the information we need to make a determination, but does anybody have any questions now? Okay, then we'll move on to the next bit of the procedure, which is the applicant making a representation. Mr. Schiller, I hope you're still there. You have up to 20 minutes to make a representation now.
Very grateful. Thank you very much. I appreciate I'm on audio only. That's probably an advantage to all of you not having to see me, but hopefully you can hear me nice and clearly. Yes, I can see some nods.
Yeah, thank you.
I had assumed that Mr. Iqbal would actually be at the meeting. From your comments, am I assuming that he definitely isn't in the room?
We looked for him quite extensively before starting this agenda item and couldn't find him or contact him.
Okay, that's fair enough. I represent him. I do not represent Gladstone Garage. I don't know very much about the particular garage. I'm here to pursue the application regarding a private hire operator's licence under Section 55 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976. You have had certain things said to you and contained within your report, which, to be honest, are the starting point. The starting point is that Mr. Iqbal is already deemed fit and proper by York to hold a private hire operator's licence. He's held a licence for a number of years. That there have been no material breaches to the licence. Those very minor things which have been drawn to your attention are within the report, and they are that minor they shouldn't influence you at all in relation to the granting of this licence. You know that he has special conditions attached to his existing licence, which he is complied with. So you have an applicant who is compliant, who knows what the rules are. You've been told that his operation has been checked, and that certainly the subcontracting elements of it are perfectly lawful. He's doing everything in accordance with what is required of him. So that is the starting point. You also know that the premises in question have planning permission, so that's already been granted. You know that there are conditions to that planning permission which are agreed, and again, no concerns over those conditions. You should be reassured by virtue of the fact that at the Blossom Street premises, same number of cars, 2 car parking spaces, and you've not been told of any car parking complaints. So again, you have a fit and proper, compliant private hire operator who knows what he can do and what he can't do, and he is perfectly willing to work with the council to make sure he stays on the correct side of the law. Any conditions, additional conditions attached to a private hire operator's licence are defined in statute and have been most fairly amplified to you. They have to be both reasonable and necessary. So both elements have to be satisfied for you to attach additional conditions. We've all heard of the adage, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Well, this is a classic scenario here. A private hire operator who reached an agreement with the council, with additional conditions, and he has kept to them all. What he is seeking, effectively, is parity. He would like a private hire operator licence at the proposed premises at Outgang Lane. He's complied with all formalities, and he is seeking parity with his existing private hire operator licence. I appreciate there are additional conditions which have been suggested for debate, but of course, if there are no concerns with what he has already been required to undertake over the last few years, then why are any additional conditions both reasonable and necessary? Because if they are not both reasonable and necessary, it would actually be unlawful to attach them, because that's what the statute says. In relation to car parking, of course, a private hire operator is responsible for certain things. Car parking is not one of the things that he is actually required to police. That being said, I am told by Mr. Iqbal that he can certainly encourage lawful parking of those vehicles which need to attend the premises on those occasions that they have to be there. They will not be parked up and loitering. They would be simply attending if they have any rent to pay, or if they needed to attend on relatively rare occasions. But the drivers are separately licensed. The vehicles are separately licensed. They are, in fact, your license holders, not Mr. Iqbal's. They are subcontracted to him so that he can give them work. If they are parking inappropriately, then they, as in the drivers in their licensed vehicles, run the risk of incurring the wrath of York Council and could potentially come in front of you and so-called lose their licenses. Their licenses are policed by York City Council, not by Mr. Iqbal. What Mr. Iqbal is prepared to do is to certainly put up numerous signs on the premises to warn the drivers, but he's prepared to go further than that. You are aware that these days most taxis work on a PDA system, which is an electronic communication device. You can send messages from the operating centre to an individual vehicle or all the vehicles. He is prepared to undertake to make sure that there is a message sent as often as you require it. It could be hourly, 3-hourly, daily, warning drivers that if they have to come to the base, they can only park in the designated car parking spaces, and if there are no spaces there, then they must wait until there's a space before they park their vehicle. So he can put warning notices up. He can add teeth to it by saying that York City Council are policing any illegal parking, and any culprits will be reported directly to the council. So he's not going to cover up for anybody who breaks rules of the road and parking legislation, but he cannot be made personally responsible because that's not his remit. His remit is to provide bookings and make sure that anybody who transports members of the travelling public do so in the correct way, and to make sure that his records are up to date, so he can encourage your licensed drivers to comply with the local parking issues. But he can't do any more than that. If you were to attempt to put a condition on his private hire operator licence regarding car parking as suggested, I would respectfully point out to you that it was pretty well unenforceable, because how could he enforce something against his own drivers along those lines? So my respectful recommendation to you is to go for option one. Option one are conditions which you know have already been complied with. They have been enforced for a number of years. There have been no material breaches, and you would be confident that moving forward that Mr. Iqbal will comply. If the landscape changes moving on, I mean, bearing in mind, according to your policy, you only have a a 12-month licence effectively in front of you for consideration today. If in 12 months' time there have been problems which have arisen, then any additional conditions could be further looked at. Similarly, if there were significant problems during the 12 months, then of course your licensing department would be tasked with investigating and reporting back. And of course, that is something which would be brought back in front of you. But to put a condition on just in case is neither reasonable nor necessary when you have a fully compliant private hire operator. Those really are the only points I wish to make at this stage. Over and above the comment about the number of vehicles, I personally don't know exactly how many vehicles there are currently being operated. All I know is that the application is for the required block of vehicles, but there has never been an issue with too many vehicles landing in a particular location, particularly at Blossom Street, where the vehicles have been littering the streets and causing not only traffic problems, but problems with car parking. And Mr. Iqbal assures me that he will make sure that his drivers get the message without gang lane in a similar fashion. He wants to stay on the correct side of the law. He wants to work with licensing, and he's already been deemed fit and proper, so you can trust his word because he's stuck by his word and he has been compliant, as is evidenced within the report. So those are my preliminary comments, and obviously you may have some questions for me.
Thank you. Yes, I hope you are happy to answer questions just to help members ascertain all the information they feel they need to determine the application.
I will certainly try.
I'll invite questions now. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Schiller.
Good evening.
One of the things that you said was about the licenses of the drivers were done by the City of York Council. Do you know whether or not Mr. Iqbal, has drivers that don't have a City of York Council badge?
Yes, he does. But of course, any other licensed driver still has to comply with the rules of the road regarding where they park.
Thank you. Do you know roughly what percentage it would be that were York drivers as opposed to other authorities?
My understanding is in excess of 75% are York, might even be higher than that. That's my understanding.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Waters.
It's a question for both the officers and the applicant's solicitor. If we go to Annex 6, private hire operators licence conditions, all applicants are required to complete an application form and are reminded that it is an offence to knowingly or recklessly make any false statement or omit relevant information. Now, unless I'm missing something, on page 62, it's quite a bit of information omitted from the applicant's application. Now, I appreciate the solicitor has said that he doesn't wish to discuss anything related to Gladstone Garage, but I just wonder whether that omitted information has any bearing on that. I just wonder what officers thought.
Which information are you referring to specifically? Is there a section of the form you're referring to, Councillor Waters?
If you go to page 62, registered company details, there's one question left unanswered there. Registered company name, registered company address, etc.
Well, with respect and through the chair, at the top of page 62, it says, is the application being made in respect of a registered company? The answer to that is no. So if it's not in respect of a registered company, then any director or secretary previously applied for any operator license wouldn't be applicable. So I don't think there's any question which has not been answered, because if that was the case, the application form would be returned to the applicant to say, please, could you complete it? You've missed out a question.
Then we get back to the issue of trading names and registered companies and the mix-ups that occur between 34 cars, York cars, again, I just wonder what officers' thoughts are on this.
Well, again, you have an applicant.
With respect, Mr. Schiller, I'm asking the City of York Council officers what their thoughts are on this.
The applicant is Mohammed Iqbal, so it's a private individual.
Yes.
And he's not applying as a registered company, he's applying as a private individual.
Then I'd go back, straight back, and say, what's his relationship with 34 cars, York cars? If we went even further back into the midst of time, Eber cars, there's umpteen different companies.
But in relation to the application, but before members today, we're dealing with a private individual who has submitted an application before members. He may be a director of other companies, but in relation to this application, he's a private individual.
Mr. Schiller, would you like to respond to that question about the other companies that the councillor mentioned?
Yes, absolutely. I concur with the advice you've been given. Mr. Iqbal has applied in his personal name for an operator's licence. He's already been deemed fit and proper in his personal name. And the only consideration you can give today is whether he is fit and proper to hold an operator's licence at these premises. You're not here to determine whether any business interest which he may either directly or loosely or related to is of relevance, because it isn't. You are purely here to decide, pursuant to Section 55 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act, whether Mohammed Iqbal should be granted a private hire operator's licence for Outgang Lane. That's the only application in front of you.
Councillor Mason?
Thank you. Probably a question to Sandra. Obviously, this application is complex because it relates to a site where we know there's been complaints. This obviously relates to a site where there has been complaints. Obviously, we wouldn't have followed up and put that information in the report if we didn't think it was relevant. What weight can we give to that when we're deciding about if someone's fit and proper to operate from a certain site, opposed to generally one operation might be fit and proper, but we might be concerned that operating from a different site might present other issues and other things for us to consider?
Well, as I understand it, there are complaints that there are parking issues at a garage, which is unconnected to the applicant, that is not in the name of the applicant. I don't know whether it is relevant, or you could say, when you are considering and bearing in mind that this applicant is already considered to be a fit and proper person because he has an operator's licence, and looking at the advice that you're given of what is considered to be the general test as to whether somebody is a fit and proper person for an operator's licence, which is set out in Annex. Sorry, I'm just turning to it. Is it Annex 4, Leslie? Sorry, it's Annex 4 on page 71, that considered to be the general test is, and the main issue is, overriding issue is generally the safety of the travelling public. And the test is considered to be, would I be comfortable providing sensitive information, et cetera, to this operator? Members need to consider the relevance of parking problems at a garage, the extent to which members can consider that those parking problems are the fault of this applicant. It's a garage. I mean, I was just thinking actually earlier that where I took my car to be MOT, not in York, small industrial estate, to be MOT'd, left it in the garage. I came back and it had been parked by the mechanics on the road in the industrial estate, not particularly well parked. Might consider parking, nothing to do with the taxi drivers, nothing to do, it was the mechanics who had parked the car. So members need to consider, I think, very carefully what relevance these parking concerns have, bearing in mind as this operator is already considered to be a fit and operator, and there are no other issues, as I understand it. Leslie might want to add something.
Just to add a point as well, members have to consider that I know that Councillor Waters may not agree with the planning decision that was made, but planning permission has been granted for this site to be an operator's base, and planning should have considered all the factors with regards to was that a suitable location for an operator.
Councillor Rose, was your question directly related to this, or was it a new question?
I suppose my only observation is then if we don't think it's relevant, or if officers don't think it's relevant, and I think I raised this point last time, is why is it given for us to consider as part of this decision-making process? And I suppose that I'd be interested in the solicitor's viewpoint as well on it.
I'm sorry, but I think you need to direct that to the officers who wrote the report. I saw the report this morning.
Yeah, it's the information provided in the report is to provide members information whether or not they determine they want to attach additional conditions which will be relevant and proportionate to this application.
Councillor Rose, does that answer your question, or do you have another one?
No, I guess I just wanted to add that I think that there is relevance here because we're talking about the character and we're talking about the context and rightly or wrongly, it sounds like there are questions about the premises, about multiple businesses and the connections, and the one person who can answer those questions isn't present and was expected here, and it is a relevant question to ask if there is a link there and more to it. Whether those only relate to parking or otherwise, I think it is still an interesting question to ask in the context of what's being asked for today.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. I just seek clarification from legal then. I thought the thrust of this was to protect the public from unsafe vehicles and operators and unsafe drivers and operators. Is that only when the vehicles are actually moving, or is that when the vehicles are just dumped on the roadside? Because it does have great bearing if officers do recall one of the photographs you were sent latter half of last year, bearing in mind that we have to suspend reality and just deal with this as an application from one individual unrelated to the rest of the businesses. Because one of the photographs you got last year was of the applicant's car parked fully blocking a footpath with a taxi plate on. You do recall that, do you, Dave?
I can't recall that personally, but that might have been before my time.
Yeah.
Councillor Kilbane.
Chair, I'm just waiting for clarification from legal as to this business of, are we protecting the public from unsafe vehicles only when they're moving or when they're just dumped in an unsafe manner?
Who the chair may answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, on the basis that Mr. Iqbal has already been deemed fit and proper as a private hire operator and there is no enforcement action taken against him and he's not under investigation for any inappropriate behaviour as a licensed private hire operator, he clearly knows what his responsibilities are, he's complied with them, and there are no concerns so far as your licensing department are concerned. So that's probably the best way I can answer it.
It's a difficult question to answer fully, Councillor Waters, because again, we don't know if the operator parked his vehicle there, or given Sandra's example earlier, if a mechanic had dealt with his vehicle and then parked it there themselves. As you're aware, the police and highways have gone up there, up into that area to assess the parking issues, and they would deal with any matters relating to illegal parking in that area.
Just so the rest of the committee is aware, we've also got Highway Development Control suggesting the imposition of double yellow lines around that area to alleviate the problem that Highways Development Control created at the planning stage, because they didn't actually go out on a site visit and ascertain that there wasn't enough parking.
We'll move on to the next question, which is from Councillor Kilbane. Yeah, if we could try to keep it to questions to Mr. Schiller for now. We will be able to ask questions of officers as well after that. We will make sure everyone has all the answers that they want. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Schiller, did I hear you right in your submission that you are saying that the condition Annex 8B is unlawful? Is that your view?
No, I said unenforceable is what I've said, because of course, if you attach a condition which is neither, well, it's a two-stage process. It's unenforceable to the extent that the people who are allegedly parking their vehicles inappropriately are not under the direct control of Mr. Iqbal. He can encourage them, he can message them, he can put posters up, but they are licensed either by York in the majority or elsewhere. And if, like any other driver, if they contravene traffic regulations, there's parking enforcement. As to whether it's unlawful, if a condition is neither reasonable nor necessary, then it does become an unlawful condition. And I would question whether you can impose a parking condition regarding concerns about a garage on someone's private hire operator's license when the mischief alleged is by third parties not under the direct control of the operator. I'm just questioning whether that is both reasonable and necessary, and therefore unlawful in Section 55 of the Act. There are other ways it can be enforced, of course, and that's by parking, going out there and imposing parking fines, etc., which happens in all sorts of places, either by way of double yellow lines or parking restrictions imposed by councils, but that shouldn't have anything to do with the private hire operator's licence.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So, Mr. Schiller, is it not within the applicant's control to stop giving work to drivers who continue to park illegally? Would he not be able to exercise control in that manner to deal with people who parked illegally?
Well, he can refuse to allow someone to work on his radio circuit as an operator. He can clearly do that, but he would have to have something drawn to his attention by way of a formal complaint about a particular driver for him to then consider, under whatever grievance procedure there is with his company, as to whether the driver has contravened the rules and regulations of his business.
So, in that case, it is within his control to an extent.
He could, if you put a complaint in under a grievance procedure to an owner, he would have to investigate it, but he would have to have hard evidence that a driver was constantly breaching certain rules and regulations. But surely the most appropriate way of dealing with it would be by those who license the driver.
No, sorry, Mr. Schiller, but you made the claim that it was not within his control, but clearly there does seem to be some control he can exercise over this issue.
He doesn't have to take anybody on. Of course he doesn't. But similarly, if he were to remove somebody because someone has alleged that he's parked his vehicle badly, I can't understand how anybody who's running a business would accept that as being a reasonable way of removing somebody from that business. If, of course, there were constant complaints about the same driver, then under the grievance procedure for the company, he's duty bound, obviously, to look at it. But a simple complaint that a vehicle's been parked badly on its own, I wouldn't have thought that he would look at it particularly seriously in those circumstances. He's going to be encouraging his drivers to comply. His record shows that he does. There's never been a problem in Blossom Street.
Mr. Schiller, if the applicant was operating private hire vehicles from this location, why would he need reports of what those private hire vehicles were doing in the immediate vicinity of the location rather than witnessing it for himself.
So I didn't understand the question. The line went a bit wobbly. Could you possibly repeat it? I do apologise.
Yes, just that section 55 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1975 describes an operator's licence as a licence to operate private hire vehicles.
Yes.
But you're trying to say that those private hire vehicles that he is licensed to operate are completely outside of his control, even if they're in the immediate vicinity of the location the operator's license would be associated with. Even if it's in the vicinity, he would not even be aware of the activities of those vehicles.
If a vehicle is being allocated a job under the private hire operator's license, then he, as the operator, needs to know where that job commenced, where it ended, various other requirements about the fare, and there's all sorts of requirements to do with that a journey for hire or reward. Between journeys, if that private hire driver decides to go to the Tesco's or to have a break or go wherever he wants to, he's not on an electronic tag. It's only where he's given a job. That's when the private hire operator is required to know what is happening and what's happening on that particular job. It's not as though he's got the power to look over his driver 24/7. Obviously, if there are complaints about an individual driver, then the council can refer it to the operator to say, we've got complaints about this driver. What are you going to do about it? That's possible. But he can't look over his drivers 24/7. That would be impractical, inappropriate, and probably unlawful.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Widdowson.
It's just an apology, Chair. I've received a phone call. I'm afraid I've got to leave.
All right, sorry about that. Next on the list was Councillor Rebellious.
Yeah, I'm just a bit concerned by, we've heard from one member here that there is a director or shareholder of Gladstone Garage with the same name, and we haven't got Mr. Iqbal here to confirm if there's any relation or not, but it would be useful to know if there's any conflict of interest there.
Mr. Schiller?
Well, there's no conflict of interest. Mr. Iqbal's applied for a private hire operator's licence in his name, regardless of what other people have business. Well, other businesses in similar names that are completely irrelevant. You're here to decide his fitness and propriety. That's your remit.
Can I just return on that? So in the writing here, it says, it should be noted that Mr. Iqbal is not a director or shareholder and may therefore be unable to control parking by their customers. But if somebody who is closely related to him is a director or shareholder, then they would be able to control parking. So it would be useful to know if there is any relation there.
He has no control over Gladstone Garage.
Mr. Schiller, one of the questions that was sent by officers as part of the application process was, can you confirm the details of your business relationship to Gladstone Garage? That question wasn't fully answered. The reply that was given was a couple of relationships that the applicant doesn't hold, but exactly what the relationship is, that information wasn't provided. Are you able to provide it?
All I can say is that he doesn't own the company. He's not employed by the company. He's not a shareholder of the company. It's not his company. I can't say more than that because I don't know.
So he's not willing to answer that question, even though it's been asked for.
Well, no, it's not that at all. It's the question which is asked is, what is his connection with that garage? He doesn't have a connection with the garage. It's a separate legal entity.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
Just on that, before I ask my question, are we permitted to ask what the relationship is, if Ms. Schiller knows what the relationship is between the people with the same surname?
So not just business relationship between the applicant and Gladstone Garage, but the nature of any sort of relationship.
Just asking if we're allowed to ask the question, if they are known relatives, if we're allowed to ask that question. I'm letting the legal guys tell me yes or no to.
I think we can ask the questions we want and then ensure that when we're deliberating, we only consider relevant information.
Okay, I guess my question is, there are a few people named, particularly by Councillor Waters, about the Iqbals. Mr. Schiller, do you know if they are related, if they have a direct relationship with one another?
I don't know. All I know is Mohammed Iqbal is my client. Mohammed Iqbal's a fit and proper person by virtue of him being granted a licence by York. I act for him.
Yeah, Chair, if I may just, I mean, that line of questioning, I mean, as Mr. Schiller said, this application is the fitness, whether Mr. Iqbal, the applicant, is fit and proper, not considering the suitability of other people who may or may not be relatives and what business interests other people may have.
Just to clarify,
in other legal entities which are not connected to this one.
To clarify my reasoning for asking is, it sounds like the question was dodged in response to, do you have any relationship to this business? And saying, I don't have this specific relationship, but there is a heavy relationship with the business, may not be a direct answer to the question that was asked. So I think it's a relevant point, even though I appreciate the point you're making on that. May I ask my second question, if that's okay? I think that was a direct answer of, he does not know the relationship.
Councillor Waters had his hand up first, so can we go to Councillor Waters and then come back for other question?
All I was just going to say was, obviously, we're not going to get a straight answer. I think we're all sensible enough to realise why. But if that's the case, then all the bluff and bluster that we've heard about Mr. Iqbal can exert no influence on the behaviour of Gladstone Garage as regards parking, as regards displacement of taxis from the rightful 5 spaces as allotted at planning. We can dismiss all that because we can't get a straight answer as to actually who can exert any pressure on Gladstone Garage to perform. If you won't give us that straight answer, we dismiss that line of reasoning that Mr. Iqbal cannot influence what's going on there.
So at this point, we are asking questions of the applicant and we'll come back to debate and those sorts of points later. Does anybody have any? Yes, Councillor Rose, you had another question for the applicant.
Yeah, my only question was following up on what Councillor Kilbane was saying on 8B, and the question of whether the person who has influence over York cars has influence over the York cars vehicles, which is what 8B specifically says. It strikes me that if any organisation said, I can't do anything about this person, they're just wearing my uniform somewhere outside of the premises, you could stop them wearing that uniform, or you could take responsibility for effectively your employees, even if they aren't employees per se. So I guess from your perspective, are you saying that there's nothing that the operator could do to ensure that vehicles aren't York cars vehicles if they have demonstrable problems in the area? I'm not saying that's a suggestion we go for 8B, but just, are you saying that you don't think there is anything that could be reasonably done by the operator in that situation?
Well, I'll answer it in this way. The operator will obviously do his level best to make sure that anybody who drives under the umbrella of his operator's licence complies with all legislation. And by way of an example, if he had a driver who was constantly driving at 34 miles an hour in a built-up area when he was out on the road, how could Mr. Iqbal police that? That driver would be either prosecuted by the police or investigated by licensing and would be stripped of their licenses. And Mr. Iqbal can engage anybody who is deemed fit and proper to hold a driver's license, and he can give them work. What he can't do is allow somebody who's not fit and proper to do work under his private hire operator's license. So it would be for those who license the drivers to provide assurances that this person isn't fit and proper, in which case Mr. Iqbal would have to comply. And if there were complaints, then Mr. Iqbal would have to investigate. But he can't do more than simply encourage, because there's no legal enforcement process by which he can do that. He can use his best endeavours.
Councillor Kent, is your question related to this, or is it a new question? You go ahead then.
So, Mr. Schiller, forgive me if this is labouring the point, but you're suggesting that this condition 8B is neither reasonable nor necessary, but the very fact that you're protesting that he can do nothing about vehicles with your cars, your client's own cars parked outside, makes me feel it's both reasonable and necessary to have this condition.
Well,
if you're saying he genuinely has no control over his own vehicles and his own drivers parking illegally outside when it's been asked that he respects that, and you've also told us he'd use his best endeavours to ensure that this won't happen. So, yes. So the condition's both reasonable and necessary, isn't it?
It isn't for this reason. The company probably deals with tens of thousands of bookings per week over a whole year. We're talking hundreds of thousands, probably running into the millions. The number of complaints that you have in front of you regarding parking issues with that you can count on the fingers of one hand. We have, this is a legitimate company that takes its responsibilities seriously. On the balance of probabilities, is it more likely than not that the drivers comply? Well, the records clearly show that they do. Is it more likely than not that the operator complies with what he is obliged to comply with? Yes, he does. So everybody strives for perfection. That's not the test. Is it more likely than not that he is fit and proper? Clearly he is, and he has shown that in spades.
Councillor Wells, is your question directly related to this, or is it a new question? Okay. Councillor Rose, is your follow-up question likely to get any more information on this subject, or have we exhausted the topic of this parking issue?
Are any of my questions going to get any responses that give me more information? Probably not. I think it could be seen as a debate point.
In that case, can we leave this issue here? Because I think we've exhausted it and got all the information that we're going to get to be able to consider this. So I hope there will be questions on other aspects of determining the fit and proper test. We'll start with Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Do you have any idea how many of the drivers that are not licensed by York have passed the York knowledge and safeguarding test? Have they been encouraged to take it? And what action's been taken there?
So was that a question for myself, I'm assuming?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, I do apologise. I've got absolutely no idea. All I know is that all York drivers have done it. The other drivers, I wouldn't know.
Yeah, councillors, we've checked on the Wolverhampton drivers that have been supplied by Mr. Iqbal. He has provided us full information in relation to the additional conditions that have been attached to his operator's licence. And I can tell you that 2 of those drivers have passed the York knowledge test and safeguarding test. The rest of the drivers haven't undertaken that test as prior. However, they have undertaken a relevant test which has been applied by Mr. Iqbal under one of the conditions.
Mr. Schiller, as part of the Department for Transport statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards, part of the one of the standards is that operators should be required to evidence that they have had sight of a basic DBS check on all individuals listed on their register of booking and dispatch staff. There isn't currently a proposed condition relating to this because this guidance came out after our statement of licensing policy was last reviewed and published. But if the committee were to approve this application, do you have any comments on a condition relating to that being added?
No, none at all.
So that's something that the applicant would consent to as reasonable.
I can't say it's an unreasonable condition because, of course, anybody who deals with personal data and bookings, you need to know whether they are appropriate people to be able to handle that information. So if you wanted to impose that, then that would be a matter that you could add to a condition, and Mr. Iqbal would be advised appropriately.
Thank you. I haven't seen any more hands for questions for the applicant. Councillor Cuthbert.
I'm sorry, I'm slightly unclear, Mr. Schiller, thank you. I'm slightly unclear, given the conversation so far, as to what's happened to the imposition of the conditions at Annex 8A. You've referred to the condition at Annex 8B. I'm just unclear as to whether Mr. Iqbal has accepted conditions on 8A in a different operator's licence, and if he has, would those be automatically applicable to the one that is being applied for at the moment, subject to it being approved, or do you have another view on that?
Well, my view is simply this, that he's complied with all the conditions that he has had hitherto. There's no need to impose additional conditions unless there's a good reason for it. Are there any complaints which have arisen as a consequence of requiring that condition? I would respectfully suggest there haven't been, and therefore there is no need to attach a condition just in case. If concerns arose, and when the matter either comes back for review or there was some enforcement during the intervening period, that would be the time to consider additional conditions.
May I just ask Mr. Schiller then if you could clarify whether Mr. Iqbal has accepted the conditions at 8A in respect of his other licence?
The conditions which were agreed following on from a settlement between York Council and Mr. Iqbal, he's accepted those and he has complied with them. And those are the conditions which I respectfully suggest ought to be carried forward in this second operator's licence, which he is applying for.
Just to clarify for members, the conditions currently attached to York Car's licence for Blossom Street are at Annex 7 on page 83.
So, I'm sorry, there was a certain amount of indirection in what Mr. Schiller had to say there. I'm not suggesting it was deliberate. I'm simply saying there were a couple of references to third-party concepts, if I could put it that way. So what we're saying is at the minute that the conditions at Annex 8A do not apply to the existing licence that Mr. Iqbal. Yes. Thank you for that, Mr. Schiller and officer.
That's correct.
Okay, are there any more questions for Mr. Schiller? Okay, Mr. Schiller, would you mind staying on the line, because we'll have some deliberations now, but would you mind just staying in case any more questions come up and we feel we need any more information before making our determination?
That's fine.
Councillor Hook, sorry, did you have a... Okay. Apologies noted. So, Councillor Kent, was that a final question for the applicant? Okay, yes, so does anybody have any questions, more questions for officers? Any more information we need to get before we can debate? Yeah, Councillor Kent.
So I've only skimmed this, but officers, can you confirm that the conditions at 8A are the same as the conditions on Annex 7? So you've just brought them forward largely. Isn't it slightly extended? There?
Yeah, the conditions on Annex 7 are the ones that are currently attached to the Blossom Street.
Yes.
The conditions in relation to 8A take into consideration on condition 1 that any driver who has taken a safeguarding and knowledge test with the York Authority and does fail, providing that they rebook onto that test, then the operator would continue to use that driver.
So can I ask, presumably you laid out the options with these conditions attached because you thought they were capable of being reasonable and necessary. And so can I ask your professional opinion as to whether both these conditions 8A and 8B are reasonable and necessary?
Yes.
And sufficient. Thank you.
Councillor Rose?
Yes, a similar question about 8A, which is it extends it beyond just the city of Wolverhampton. Was there a particular reason for that? Have we had any concerns about any other drivers related?
When the conditions at Annex 7 were agreed with Mr. Iqbal in relation to the Blossom Street, Mr. Iqbal was just operating Wolverhampton vehicles at that present time. Currently, there is applications in relation to Leeds, Bradford, and Ashfield Council.
Councillor Ward.
And Ashfield are being operated, being used in York, aren't they?
Sorry, Ashfield is a live licence now, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any more questions? Yes, Councillor Nichols?
It might be a bit random, but on the minutes of the last meeting, you said that you found people from Wolverhampton operating cars that were not fit. By any chance, are any of those from 34?
Do you mean in this report, the three?
Yes, and well, it's the minutes of the last meeting. I don't know how you could get the minutes of the last meeting into report, but it said that you tested 31 vehicles, of which 11 failed and 3 were from Wolverhampton.
They were not applied to this operator.
No, those
sorry, the Wolverhampton vehicles.
Yeah,
they were in relation to the vehicles, not the operator.
Right.
Okay, are there any more questions for officers, or should we move into debate? Yeah, Councillor Iqbal.
Sorry, just picking up the point about the Bradford and Leeds are a lot nearer than Wolverhampton. I still find it odd that Wolverhampton drivers find it necessary to come all this way, but who am I? Can these be added in to sort of seem that Mr. Iqbal's creating an empire of drivers coming into York?
Are you making a proposal?
Well, yeah, all those other places, if we do grant the licence, are added in.
I think
they're all a lot closer.
That is the proposition 8A.
All right, sorry.
I'm struggling to find the exact wording, but I think that's covered in one of the proposed conditions in Annex 8A. Has anyone found exactly where it is?
All of them.
Yeah, does that satisfy you?
Well, yes, but sorry, I didn't see that because I was reading a bit further down, where it says all they have to do is book to undertake the test. Doesn't make it clear that they have to pass and how quickly they've got to take that retest. All it says is if they fail, they have to agree to undertake the test. And then or has subsequently passed. It should say and subsequently passes.
Yeah. Yes, so when we get to the point of proposing what option we want to go with and what conditions that we would like to add, that sort of wording is exactly what we can consider. We can do that now if you have a proposal ready. Or we can continue to debate a little bit longer if anybody is leaning towards any other proposals. Councillor Mason?
I suppose I'll make a statement. My concern really is that we've asked him about a connection to a company who was formed after all the complaints anyway. So I don't think we can kind of take that into account. But we obviously are concerned that he's linked to the company where we've had lots of complaints and he now wants to operate a business from that same site. And that's my overarching concern really, is that, you know, we're concerned he's managed a business there that's caused lots of problems locally. Now he wants to give him a license in a separate capacity to operate from the same place. So that's my observations.
I'm really sorry, we shouldn't be moving into deliberations yet because I haven't given Mr. Schiller the opportunity to sum up, which I said we would do. Sorry, I accidentally missed that point. So if everybody has any more questions for officers, we'll do that and then we'll give Mr. Schiller the opportunity to sum up. I didn't see which hand was first. I'll go to Wells, Councillor Wells.
One of the things that Mr. Schiller said is that if there are complaints about parking or wrongdoing of the vehicles, then it's up to the council to sort that out. Do we have any power, jurisdiction or whatever you want to call it, over cars that are licensed by another authority?
Any vehicles that are licensed by another authority, our parking services could deal with any offences which were committed at the roadside. The police could deal with any obstruction offences. As a licensing authority, we work closely with other councils within the West Yorkshire district and also Wolverhampton officers to provide any information back to them relating to any issues.
Councillor Mason?
If we did grant a licence for 12 months, would it automatically come back to us to make that second decision once the new policy is in place about renewing it, or would that be a delegated decision, or what's the process for ones that are granted for 12 months?
It would be a delegated decision to officers. So it would only come back before members if there was a cause to bring an operator back before members.
Does that depend on the wording in the statement of licensing policy? Is it the statement of licensing policy that determines whether it would come back to the committee or not? Because we don't know yet what that new statement of licensing policy will be.
in the draft statement of licensing policy, renewals are an officer decision. So, but we don't know what feedback may come back from a consultation and how that may be adapted.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rose?
Just to clarify the point made around 8A, my reading is that they can continue to operate if they have books to undertake the test, even if they failed. But I can't see anything that says they can't just keep doing that indefinitely. And every time they fail, rebook the test. Is there a limit on the number of times you can take the test in a time frame?
There is. Under our procedures, they're allowed to take the test up to 6 times. At that point, then they would not be allowed to take it again for another 6.
But they could, for hypothetically, book it 3 months in advance, continue to operate even though they've got challenges and they haven't passed it, and then fail it and continue to book it for 6 occasions.
Yes.
Is there a set of wording we could put in that may prohibit doing that exact thing beyond the first attempt? For example, another clause that says the same thing, except for unless the driver has booked to undertake. So unless they've undertaken and it's their first failure, or some words to that effect, would that be doable?
Yeah, I think we'd have to, that's a hard one to answer at this second. I think we would have to consider that as part of the review of the taxi licensing policy, because we are reviewing the conditions as a whole that will be going on operators' licenses as part of that review.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as an observation, obviously the existing condition is that Mr. Iqbal won't use a driver that has failed the York knowledge and safeguarding test within the previous years at all, unless they've passed. So actually, in many ways, taking away the restriction that the current condition only applies to Wolverhampton, and the new condition would apply to any authority, in some ways, the actual amended condition is more generous to him, because it actually enables him to use drivers that are booked onto the test or subsequently passed. So, you know, don't know if that helps.
So to clarify, because option 7 has almost identical word, Annex 7 has almost identical wording, you could just remove has books to undertake the York safeguarding and knowledge test to specifically say unless the driver has subsequently passed, like it says in Annex 7. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. It was just in reply to Councillor Wells's concern about parking and what the council could actually do in relation to any problem parking. What the council could do, and it's a shame Mr. Iqbal isn't here, is referring back to his statement, which is quite clear on a webcast, which I will dig out later for everybody. But you'll have to forgive me. I can't remember whether it was the planning decision for the taxi booking office or the original planning decision for the Gladstone garage operation, but he did commit at planning stage that if there were parking problems, he would look to rent another unit down there just exclusively for parking. It's there on a webcast. Is
there a question for officers? Or?
Question to public protection. You will, of course, recall that link that I sent you back end of last year.
So, sorry, Councillor Waters, I don't recall it off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean to say that you didn't send it. So
no, there was a flurry of correspondence after the 21st December decision.
Councillor Avilius.
I just want to be clear on our duty around, when we're considering this, are we only considering members of the public using Mr. Iqbal's service, or are we also considering other road users and people on the pavement in terms of duty of care?
I think the guidance in relation to the fit and proper status has been, provided in relation to this, and it's about the applicant himself being fit and proper to undertake that private hire operation. and that's considered. In relation to the report that's been submitted, it also then does provide members with options relating to conditions that can be attached additionally to that licence to ensure that his operation is safe, you know.
But we're supposed obviously to be considering that we're protecting members of the public. And if this licence were to create a problem that put other road users in danger, that would not be protecting members of the public.
I think the scenario in relation to the location is a difficult one to answer because at this present time, it's an unknown entity in relation to, you know, whether that control is there. I mean, the guidance in relation to fit and proper and protection of the public is given by the Institute of Licensing and also the best practice which we've been provided. We have to look at that as the starting point of any fit and proper application.
Councillor Nichols?
Yeah, I'm just confused about the bit where I said, can we make changes to 8A? And you said, no, it needs to be part of something else. But 7A was changed to 8A. So I don't understand why we therefore can't change it again. You're going to go back, but you already changed 7A to 8A, so just change it to 9A.
Yeah, as part of your deliberations and agreeing an option, you could suggest wording for amendments to conditions. But just so you're aware, 8A was put together in relation to other applications for private hire operators. So, of course, we had to remove reference to York cars and Wolverhampton vehicles.
Right.
Any more questions for officers? Okay, Mr. Schiller, I'd like to give you the opportunity to sum up and make some closing comments, up to 5 minutes, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My concern is that we're moving on a tangent here because, of course, what you have in front of you is an application by Mr. Iqbal to be licensed as a private hire operator. In Annex form, page 71, you have the definition of what is fit and proper. You know Mr. Iqbal has already been deemed fit and proper, and you already know that he's complied with all the conditions which have been placed upon him. On that basis, the starting point has got to be that you must grant a private hire operator's license. Once you have done that, then of course you're moving into the territory of, well, we know that Mr. Iqbal is fit and proper. Are there any specific conditions relating to this private hire operator's license, which we feel is both reasonable and necessary to impose? Bearing in mind the conditions which he's already complied with, you have a few concerns in relation to car parking. I say a few because within this report are highlighted a few examples out of what will be hundreds and thousands of journeys. You then have to decide, well, are any of those directly relevant to Mr. Iqbal? In what way can Mr. Iqbal be made to encourage compliance on public roads? You know full well from what you've been told that the police and indeed your highways department can take enforcement action. You also know that there is a cooperation between York and other licensing authorities regarding licensed drivers. And you know that you have powers to take action against any driver who persistently breaks any rules and regulations or conditions. You can strip them of their licenses. So you cannot micromanage a private hire operator's license, but what you can do is make sure that any concerns that you potentially may have based on evidence that is in front of you are allayed by such reasonably necessary conditions. I would respectfully suggest that you know what those conditions are, because those are the ones he's already complied with, that over the next 12 months, he will be closely monitored and scrutinised. There's no doubt that any complaints will be made known to licensing, and you will also know that they will be investigated. If they are significant, then the matter can be brought back in front of you. If they are investigated and deemed not appropriate to bring back in front of you because they are not significant, then they could form part of any renewal consideration next year, depending on what your policy is then, or indeed whether or not it's deemed appropriate to bring it back in front of yourselves. But you need to deal with it with respect in that way. Start off by the license itself. Once you've gone over that hurdle, then you move on to what conditions you deem both reasonable and necessary. I would simply conclude to say that what is in existence at the moment works. It should be left alone. If you disagree with me and you want to impose additional conditions, then that's within your remit. Those would be my representations.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to deliberations. The options that we have are on page 56 of our report. So if we could bear those in mind, because those are what we are considering. Yes, the options are to refuse the application, in which case we would need to provide the grounds for that, or to grant the licence with the standard conditions and or the agreed additional conditions at Annex 7, or we have the option to grant the licence with whatever combination of additional conditions that we deem necessary, and some people have already indicated that there may be some that they would modify in that case. So who would like to kick us off? Councillor Kent.
I propose an amendment to condition 8A, such that Councillor Rose suggested, where you just, and Councillor Nichols, where after failed the York knowledge and safeguarding test within the previous 3 years, unless the driver has booked to undertake the York safeguarding and knowledge test, and just go on to say has subsequently passed, as is in Annex 7. So it mirrors that wording. And then I would propose that option 2, taking into account Annex A and Annex B as conditions, are both reasonable and necessary, because notwithstanding everything and Mr. Schiller has said and the assurances, this is a different location. This isn't Boston Street, and there are existing problems with parking around there, and we're uncertain about the relationship between the applicant and the garage next door. Even if we weren't, it's a bad spot for parking, so that makes the condition 8B necessary and reasonable.
Okay, so option 2 has been proposed. Would you consider including in your proposal a condition that the applicant said they'd be happy to accept about paragraph 8.9 from the DFT's statutory guidance?
Yes.
There is some proposed wording for that condition here. I'll read it out, and I think there's paper copies if anyone prefers to read it. Yeah. I'll read this extra condition and see if you're happy to include it in your proposal of option 2. The licensed operator shall ensure that booking and dispatch staff provide a basic disclosure criminal record check as a requirement of employment. A record of this check will be kept in a register of booking and dispatch staff. The register should be available for inspection by authorised officers of the council. So that's to address the guidance in paragraph 8.9, which is on paragraph 75 of our papers. Okay, so we have a proposal. Is anybody willing to second that? No, we'll go to Councillor Nichols for a different point then.
Sorry, on the first meeting, so I might be wrong. Can I just put a time limit on Councillor Kent's proposal? Because I think just leave it open-ended. I think pass within 3 months isn't unreasonable.
So what wording?
So exactly the same as to bring forward 7A into 8.
Can I think correct something on that, Chair, if that's okay. I believe it says that he's not allowed to use the person who's failed until they have passed. So the 3 months isn't, that's how quickly you could potentially take it, but until he takes it, or she, that person wouldn't be able to drive under that name. Is that a correct understanding, that basically if we took Councillor Kent's amendment, they would not be able to use someone who has failed until they have passed?
Yes.
That answer the question.
Councillor Kilbane?
I was kind of more tapping my head thinking, but I will happily speak. I must admit, when I first looked at this application, I just thought, well, you know, this is a little bit of a no-brainer. There's absolutely no legal grounds for refusing the application. There are concerns around it, of course, that have been well aired tonight, but legally, I don't think there are any grounds at all for refusing the application. Then, of course, during Mr. Schiller's submission, I started to swing violently towards refusing the application, given the obfuscation and the idea that somebody that ran a taxi firm had no control over their drivers was frankly insulting to all of our intelligence. However, we have to stay within the guidelines that that we're working within, and I see no grounds legally, much as it might irk some people, but I see no grounds legally for refusing this application. And indeed, you know, in the past year, I think the operator has complied with all conditions that were laid upon them. There was a problem in the past, and that seems to be getting better, and it does seem to be getting sorted out. So we should take that as being a good thing. And so I will happily second the proposal for option 2 with the amendments as agreed.
Do we need to clarify, because it's got a bit complicated, exactly what is being proposed, or is everyone keeping up? Everyone following? Okay. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I second everything that Peter said. I think if I were to have a concern leaning towards rejection, I think, well, 2 things. Firstly, the definition of fit and proper, that's an example. We can apply our own example of what we define as fit and proper. But secondly, within the definition that's provided here, it says for criminal or unacceptable purposes. And I would say that we definitely have someone who doesn't commit crimes, but likes to find ways to bend what is there. And in the case of Annex 7, has taken that on by not just using Wolverhampton Council, in addition to complying to what we've had in front of us, and not being here to address our questions is not necessarily ideal either. So I think there are questions to be asked, but personally, I don't think that they are legal grounds to reject. I do agree with the necessity of Annex A. I think that I also note, as well as expanding over the councils, it expands over potential future names of related organisations potentially in 8A, and I think that is a necessary and reasonable adjustment. I think 8B, however, I think is reasonable, but I do think is unnecessary when it is the law that they have to follow it. So I would counter propose 8A with all the amendments we've discussed, and the extra condition, but not 8B. But I'm happy in either instance, because worst case scenario, 8B underlines the point that this specific thing should be focused on. And I'd hope in either instance, Mr. Schiller would be willing to relay to Mr. Iqbal that we want due scrutiny above and beyond the bare minimum for parking in that location.
So you're formally proposing?
It's a formal proposal for 8A with the discussed amendments and not 8B.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Mason.
I think I might be a little bit lost in all the B's and the A's. But I think my observations are pretty much the same, as that, you know, I think there's a lot of concerns about this operator. I think a lot of concerns, particularly about this actual site, but probably not enough to tip the balance the other way. I think the 12 months thing is good, that we've granted for 12 months and gives that kind of chance to see what goes on. But I think if we could add to whichever options and changes we're putting in, could we put that it comes back here for that review? And I think there's probably other operators that we've granted licenses for that we'd probably be interested in bringing back to a full committee as well. So maybe that's the policy that needs to change, opposed to something on this specific condition.
Councillor Cuthbertson.
I was just going to counter second what Councillor Rose proposed.
So you were seconding Councillor Rose's proposal. Okay.
I don't think that
Chair, I'm really sorry to interrupt the debate, but given that people are discussing condition 8B, and which I'm reading, and you saw me just having a chat with Matt, because I was just raising my own concerns about the condition. I don't think it was an enforceable condition or reasonable one to state that the operator will ensure that no York car vehicles will park on surrounding streets, and whether to expect him to be able to control that. I would thought that if it is considered appropriate to have a condition he can only control really what happens on his own premises. So that condition, I would say the wording would have to stop on at the private operating premise on Gang Lane. And he cannot be required to ensure that there should be no unlawful parking on surrounding streets. And of course, unlawful parking is a matter for drivers, and there are other controls to deal with unlawful parking. It's being mentioned by officers.
In your view, would the condition be acceptable if the words "take reasonable measures to" was inserted between "will" and "ensure"? So the operator will take reasonable measures to ensure that no York cars, vehicles, etc.
Well, I think that's more reasonable, but I think then it starts to become meaningless. I think he can control what happens on his premises, but I don't think he could be expected to control what happens on the public highway.
Okay, so what has been proposed and seconded doesn't include this condition. The first one wasn't seconded, only proposed. It's now been seconded. Okay, but it was seconded after. Right. Okay, I see. So, do people feel ready to take a vote on that first option, or do we need further debate first? Councillor Rose?
I'm just referring back to Councillor Kent, if the conversation around changing wording on 8B changes anything for what her proposal might be.
Yes, if you'd like to change.
I tend to agree that it starts to become meaningless. I mean, the point of it is to highlight to Mr. Iqbal that we do expect him to do all he can to manage the parking in this area. But once you dilute it, it does. And I'm also slightly wondering whether is the legal recommendation that you're saying that this is actually unenforceable, that we shouldn't add it? Because that's why when I initially asked officers, you said, yes, it is necessary and reasonable, but are you saying it's not?
Well, my view that it is obviously it's for members to consider what conditions they may consider reasonable, and then I don't think that this condition as worded is reasonable and lawful or enforceable. I don't think he can be expected to, as I've said, control what happens on the public highway. I think he can only be expected to control what happens on his own premises. So I think it's the second part of that condition, which I have concerns about.
Councillor Kilbane.
I think it's perfectly reasonable for the owner of a taxi firm to tell his drivers that if they park in a particular place, they're not going to get any more work. In other words, they're going to be sacked. It's totally within his control who he employs and the conditions upon which he employs them. I think it's absolutely reasonable, especially given the concerns around this particular site, that it's clear that if they park in places around there that causes a problem, he ain't going to employ them. It's perfectly within his control.
But with respect, if I may just respond, I don't think that's what the Commission is saying. This condition is requiring him to ensure, so technically or in theory, he could be guilty of a breach of a condition, which I think is a serious matter in taxi licensing terms, because somebody has parked unlawfully. This absolutely requires him to ensure that. It's a different matter to say he shall not employ anybody who parks unlawfully, whether that would be such an unlawful, but that's not what this condition is saying. It's requiring him to ensure that there is no unlawful parking, and he could be in breach of this condition. And doesn't, well
that's why we need it.
The matters that are not being suggested are not really not the remit of on operators.
I mean, if I can come back, Sandra, it's the fact that we think he'll be in breach that we need it. And you know, you can word it whichever way you want, but if Mr. Iqbal, and I'm sure he will, if there's complaints coming in and he can demonstrate the actions that he's taken to try and ensure that that doesn't happen, then he'll have a robust defence. But if actually what happens is people park wherever they want and cause all kinds of problems down there, and he's not trying to do anything about it, then there may be grounds for reviewing his licence.
I think what I'm thinking is to what extent these would be caused by his drivers, in the sense that if these cars are parked because they're visiting the garage for repairs and mechanics move the cars out and park them on the road, that is not the operator's responsibility or problem, or he's not causing that problem. That is something that is no fault of his. That's my concern about that, is that he could be in breach of this.
and the mechanics are moving their parking them. That's my concern.
Well, the garage is the same site as the base that he's applying to run a taxi firm from. So he can make it absolutely clear to the garage that they're not to park the cars in places where they shouldn't be parked.
He doesn't operate, he doesn't operate the garage.
Well, okay, if we put reasonable endeavours in, then
yeah,
it's making the point.
Councillor Waters.
Right, well, is it worth turning to page 92 then and looking at condition 5 on the planning approval? Tying that in with anything that's conditioned tonight. Practically, it's unachievable.
Which part of page 92?
Condition 5.
Sorry, could you ask that again?
Is it worth tying in adherence to the planning condition 5 with whatever's applied tonight in terms of additional conditions?
So in case he applies for a variation of condition on the existing planning permission, to ensure that condition would still apply to the license.
This is part of, presumably you're going to grant him his operator's license. Adherence to the planning condition is part of the taxi operator's license conditions.
No, Chair, you can't use the taxi licensing regime to ensure compliance with conditions on a planning permission. I mean, they're separate regimes, and he has a condition on the planning permission which he must put a condition on it. Sorry, on the operator's license, say that they must comply with their planning conditions.
Well, no, I'll just sum up by saying that this whole carry-on has been a complete comedy of errors for the last over 3 years now. From 2 planning approvals, the Gladstone garage operation, taxi booking office approved when officers didn't even go down for a site visit and didn't understand that there was no parking. To the revocation of the licensing, when was it? November 2020. That wasn't followed through properly, robustly, shall we say. So the state of play where we are now.
Relevant to what we're determining today?
No.
All right.
It's just me getting it off my chest at this utterly surreal situation that Councillor Kilbane will be facing in a few weeks or months' time when there's an application to put double yellow lines around there, which will simply move the problem and disperse it further afield.
If there's any pertinent points that aren't relevant to what we're determining today, but are points you still want to make, maybe we can do that outside this meeting and try to stay as on topic as possible so we can all get out of here while it's still light-ish. Councillor Avillius, did you have your hand up?
I've got concerns. If I want to think that somebody's fit and proper, then I need to trust them. And when it comes to question 2, the additional questions that Mr. Iqbal was asked, can you on the details of your business relationship to Gladstone Garage? And he answered, our client is neither a director nor a shareholder of Gladstone Tyre and Autocola. It's evading the question rather than answering the question. And that makes me question whether I can trust this person, given what we've heard, that there is another Iqbal who is a director of this garage. And given that Mr. Iqbal is not here today either, and we haven't been able to get to the bottom of understanding this, I question whether I can trust him and say that he's fit and proper.
Given the complaints about cars that say York cars on them specifically, their parking practices in this area, I do think it would have been helpful to know what the business relationship is, because if there is a contractual arrangement for servicing, that's the sort of thing that we could have taken into account, but the information wasn't provided even though it was asked for. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I guess 2 very quick things. The first one is just to clarity on the point around point 5 and the planning permission. Is the understanding that it would be unlawful for them not to retain 5 spaces specifically for the purposes described there, and that's why it's not necessary, is because it's already a requirement for them to operate on those premises? Or have I misunderstood the legal point that was made around that paragraph 5.
There's a few microphones on. Can they be turned off when they're not being used?
Well, I understood that what we were being asked to consider was whether a condition could be attached to the operator's license requiring compliance with conditions on a planning permission. Are you now saying that what you actually want to do is just a specific condition?
I'm asking if it's superfluous to look at something like that because it's already a requirement of the license. They wouldn't be able to operate if they were in breach of paragraph 5 here, or whether it is worth us trying to find another way of wording the points on paragraph 5 to keep it in the conditions for licensing separate to the reference to the planning, if that makes coherent sense.
Well, obviously it was considered at the planning approval stage that this condition was necessary for planning purposes. If you consider that a similar sort of condition is necessary on an operator's license in order to consider that the applicant meets the fit and proper test, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering between, is it worth having 8 be modified to incorporate the text here? So there are 5 spaces retained for that purpose, and all reasonable endeavours are put in place to minimise or avoid any impact on surrounding residential streets, whatever the right wording is for that, or whether this is already required by the planning, and therefore there's no benefit in putting it into the text because it's already a requirement of the location. I don't know if it makes any difference, I guess is my question.
Well, it would be duplication of the requirement. It's already a condition of the planning permission. There are, which can be enforced if it is considered expedient, I think is a test for planning enforcement.
Can it be, can the consequences of a breach on the planning be to revoke licensing or have any impact on licensing?
No.
So there might be a difference in adding this into the
it might mean I don't know what the taxi or your licensing officers consider whether about having a similar condition on a planning permission and on an operator's license. I suppose one consideration might be it might give other enforcement options, but I don't know whether taxi officers, your licensing, Matt looks like he wants to comment on having a duplicate condition. It wouldn't seem really right to me, but
I was going to pick up on the point that it does give, if you like, additional enforcement options, doesn't it? If you've got a condition like that, it could be a potential breach of a licensing condition as well. So it does, in that respect, it does give additional options.
Also, if we consider the condition necessary in licensing terms, but we don't add it, it would still be possible for there to be an application to change of condition made to planning, and then this condition could hypothetically be changed or removed in the future by planning, and it then wouldn't apply to the license, even if we as a committee deem it appropriate to apply to the license.
Chair, yes, that's actually a good point, because planning obviously are considering, when they are considering the suitability of that condition, should an application be made to remove it, they're not considering the fit and proper test. They are considering planning, the planning merits of such a condition. So yes, that is a point, is that it might give you that assurance that it won't be all off a planning permission potentially.
I've got Councillor Kilbane and then Waters and then Rowe.
So just very quickly, whether or not we trust the applicant is neither here nor there. If they've passed a fit and proper test, as far as this application is concerned, whatever our personal thoughts might be, then that's they qualify.
Councillor Waters.
In terms of what's termed a duplicate condition, I'll apologise because there's no really polite way to say this, so I'm not even going to try. But quite honestly, I would trust public protection their interest and their robustness, shall I say, in pursuing a condition far and above that of planning enforcement. So I hope we do get it on as a dual.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
It's a lot more polite than I thought that sentence was going. May I make a proposal, please? 8A as described previously, 8B to say the operator will ensure that the area on the approved plans for et cetera, from section 5, and the operator will use all reasonable endeavours to ensure that on the existing wording, which I think ticks all of the boxes we've had so far.
Is this a new proposal of option 2?
It's replacing my previous proposal, please. Still option 2.
Would you mind going through exactly what you're proposing again, just so we make sure we've got it accurately?
Yeah, so 8A as described to cross out has books to undertake the York Safeguarding Knowledge Test, so only those who have passed are permitted, and to accept the additional addendum, whatever that's hiding, the extra condition. So 8A as described in our previous propositions from Councillors Kent and myself.
Plus the standard conditions.
Yeah, I've got is that bit.
And the extra condition about DBS checks.
Yep. That's 8A modifications. And 8B modifications to say the operator will ensure that, and then the text of section 5, the area on the approved plans for the parking and manoeuvring of 5 vehicles shall be retained solely for such purposes during the times it's operational, which I note is 24/7. And then separately changing the word and say the operator will use all reasonable endeavours to ensure that, rather than the operator will ensure that, based on the guidance we received from legal earlier. I don't know if that sits well with Councillors Kent and others, but that's my proposal for how we tie up the loose ends.
Okay, so we still have a proposal previously proposed by Councillor Kent and seconded.
Can I withdraw it, because I'll withdraw mine.
Okay, so we have one proposal from Councillor Rose, which has not yet been seconded. Would anybody like to second it? Councillor Kilbane. Okay, so there's one proposal on the table at the moment. Oh,
sorry, just when we were edging. The wording, I'm really sorry, the wording use all reasonable endeavours. It has, in legal terms, it has certain meanings, and you're supposed to define what that means. It gets quite complicated, because does that mean he has to take legal procedure? You know, there are, it is a moot point what it means. I don't think that is going to be easy for officers to enforce.
So is there other wording which means the same thing in layman's terms, but doesn't have the same legal implications?
Reasonable. Yeah. I'm used to writing contracts, so I always use reasonable endeavours for that reason. Yeah, so to take all appropriate steps. I mean, they're all watering down the original statement. So what's the right way of saying everything that can be seen to be done by an appropriate person?
So Sandra's just having a look at some proposed wording now. So while she has a minute to do that, we'll go to Councillor Kent.
I'm wondering if you could say take demonstrable steps, which shows that he's got to prove that he's done something.
I like that. I think that's more quantifiable, isn't it, objectively? Matt's just passed me a note, which I didn't really understand. That Matt, sorry, Matt. Sorry, through you, Chair.
Apologies. I was just trying to make a note that the reasonable endeavours is consistent actually with what has been put on before. That's all I was trying to say in the existing conditions. It's certainly part of the consent order. I'm pretty sure it made it through to the existing conditions. But if we can improve on that, then
yes,
we'll be guided by you.
So some other wording has been proposed as an alternative. Can you remind us what it was, Councillor Kent?
I said take demonstrable steps.
So instead of will ensure, remove will ensure and replace that with will take demonstrable steps. Councillor Rose, are you happy to?
I don't like demonstrable steps because you can do something, it doesn't mean it's good. So anything that could be done would be demonstrable, but that doesn't mean it's the steps that are appropriate. What we're trying to say is we want them to take the most stern steps that they can within without saying we'll fire and we'll do the following list of things and we'll stop working with. And
so not removing will ensure, keeping will ensure, and adding in. So the operator will take demonstrable steps to ensure.
Yeah.
That's what I was suggesting. But
I was just thinking all necessary demonstrable steps, or I just think to take demonstrable steps just means he's gone and looked once a day and it's not a problem currently. That's demonstrable steps. I'm happy to back the consensus in the room. I'm just calling out the reasons that I chose the way I did.
Councillor Mason.
Is this the type of thing we can delegate to you, Chair, to spend some time with legal after this meeting? I think you've got the idea where we want to get to and then circulate something before it's finally added.
My concern is that how are officers to know whether or not all reasonable steps, all demonstrable steps or best steps have been taken? I think it's hard for officers to know whether or not there's been a breach of this condition potentially. I don't know whether officers who would be enforcing this condition would want to comment on what they consider they can enforce.
I'll allow officers to comment and then go to Councillors Rose and Kent.
I take your point, but it's already there effectively. We've already got that condition in or that spirit at least around conditions. But I'm happy for Dave and Leslie to have their view.
Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you to look at it in reverse, that not that they have to prove that everything reasonable was done individually, but that if anything is not done and that's why there's a problem, all you have to do is prove that that thing that they should have done was reasonable. And also if the council advises them to do something and it's a reasonable thing to ask and they don't do that, it then effectively passes forward that requirement and says that it's if we can prove they continue to ignore council advice that isn't specifically prescribed here, that then kind of breaches those terms, if that makes sense.
Councillor Kent?
Sorry, I think everyone's lost the will to live slightly, but I am. The reason I use demonstrable because then it's up to the applicant to say to licensing or to the officers to show them what they've done. It's up to the officers to judge whether it's reasonable or not. So it gives a test for the officers to judge by. But I'm happy to leave it with the officers for the accurate phrasing at this stage.
So, did somebody propose, we've got almost all of the wording down as part of a proposal. There's just one, was there a proposal to
Councillor Mason's proposal for you to finish it off
to delegate final approval based only on the wording of this condition? All the other conditions, the wording is agreed. Is that? Guess what? So has that proposal been incorporated into what is proposed and seconded?
Yeah.
Does anybody have anything to add or can we take a vote? Oh, I love not seeing. We just need, before we vote, I just want to make sure everyone is perfectly clear on what we're voting on. And so I'll be asking the democracy officer to read that to us. But could you please clarify to the democracy officer exactly what we're voting on, just so the recorded decision is exactly accurate?
Yes, amending 8A to remove that people who haven't passed the test and have failed can continue to drive, and to add the amendment that was circulated around the table to 8A, and for 8B to add the section 5 referenced in their planning requirements. And to add in whatever phrasing the relevant experts at the table would like to add to soften the wording of ensure appropriately.
And the additional condition about DBS checks. Yeah. So is everybody, I just want to ensure that everyone is completely clear on what we're voting on, because it did get a bit complicated. Everyone needs to be fully informed before they vote. Yes, is everyone? I'm seeing lots of nods. That's good. Okay, so can I see those in favour of option 2 as proposed, please? Okay. Any? Have you got any of that? Any abstentions? One abstention down the end, and any against? Okay, that is agreed. So the final item on the agenda is urgent business. We haven't, Councillor Mason.
I'm just going to say some things and you can pick them up later, but if we could get a forward plan and these could be added, it'd be good to get an update on the drive licence we approved, because obviously I know there's been some concerns about that, and I'd like to put on the agenda about licensing hearings becoming physical again. Having watched yesterday's and seen some of the technical challenges and things you had to come up with, I think we should be going back to doing them in person.
Okay, I have made a note of all of those to pick up outside of this meeting. I haven't had, and we don't have any, oh, Councillor Waters, sorry.
Well, seeing as Councillor Mason had just spoke there, I know you'll say it's not appropriate to raise this, but I think you do need a vice chair, and maybe it's time to chivvy the Lib Dems on to put Councillor Mason's name forward.
Thank you, noted. No other hands, excellent. We're so close to getting out of here. So yes, there's no urgent business, and so that is everything done. I call this meeting to a close. Thank you everybody for your time.